Welcome to HP FanFiction. Support me by subscribing the channel. Also, like and share the video to keep me motivated to make more videos like these. Past timeline, somewhere in year 1534 AD, he was running through the night. His heart was beating loudly in his ears, his breathing was labored and his feet tired. He stumbled, caught himself and continued running. It was dark already, and the longer he ran, the darker it got. He was inside a forest, far away from any kind of civilization he could see, but he dared not to stop, dared not to relax his guard and give his body the rest it needed. "Ralston, please," a young girl's voice begged him when he stumbled again. The voice sounded even more tired than he felt. "Please, I can't run anymore." "But you have to, Mona," he replied while forcing himself to keep running. "We're still far too close. They will find us if we don't keep running." "But I'm tired, Ralston," the girl replied. Then she stumbled as well, and only Ralston's grip on her hand prevented her fall. "I know," he huffed, "but we have no choice. We have to get away from here." "But if we stop, they will come and drag us back there," Ralston argued. He felt the girl shivering behind himself when he said that, and for a moment he regretted his blunt words. He knew that she was terrified of them, and he couldn't fault her. If they had done to him what they did to her, he would have been terrified as well. "I'm sorry, Mona," he apologized anyway. "'S all right," she answered instantly. "You're right anyway." But Ralston wished he wasn't. She was only a girl of 11. She shouldn't be running through the night in search for safety. But then Ralston thought bitterly, "I'm 12, going on 13. I shouldn't be running as well." And yet here they were, running through the night, fearing even the shadows on their way. What if they were caught by them? What would happen to them if their pursuers would catch them? And pursued they were. Ralston couldn't hear them over the wind, but he knew they were there. He had seen their shadows not too long ago. How long would it take until they were caught? Their pursuers were close. One false step, 1 second of hesitation, and they would be caught. But they couldn't go back. Not Ralston, and especially not Mona. Ralston shuddered inwardly. Even yet, hours after they fled, he could hear the headmaster's voice cutting through the wind to reach their fleeing forms. "Running away, my boy," he had called after them. "That's not the Gryffindor thing to do, Ralston." At those words, Ralston had faltered for a second. He was a Gryffindor. He was proud to be a Gryffindor, and yet he was running. Then Mona had stiffened next to him, and he was reminded of the 11-year-old girl who had suffered at the hands of the man who should have shielded her. Ralston picked up speed, pulling the girl with him by their clasped hands. He wouldn't sit by and watch her suffer again? Yes, he was a Gryffindor. Yes, he was proud to be sorted in the House of Courage. But sometimes it needed courage to run away as well, and Ralston had shown that courage that day. He would not force Mona to return to people who tortured her. "Ralston, please," she pleaded again with him. "Just a bit longer," he reassured her. "Just a bit. We just need to find a place where we can hide from them. We need to stay safe. We can't return to them. We can't." But it was fruitless, and Ralston knew that. They were still far too close, with their pursuers right behind them. They had no chance anymore. Even if they kept running, their pursuers would get them soon. In that moment Mona stumbled, and Ralston was too late to catch her. She tumbled into him, and they both fell to the floor and down a steep slope to their left. In the end their fall was broken by the most unexpected thing. A body. A human, living and breathing body. The man, because the body was definitely male, had been walking until the two children basically tumbled on top of them. To Ralston's surprise, the man beneath them actually grabbed both children and broke their fall with his own body deliberately so that they wouldn't get hurt further. They ended up in a heap on the floor, the man mostly buried by Ralston's and Mona's limbs. "Meh," the man said. "That's not how I imagined my not quite allowed trip onto the Isles would go." Ralston blinked confused at the man, but before he could even think about saying something, other voices could be heard in the wind. "We're close," a voice that sent shivers down Ralston's neck called. "I heard them over there." They were done for. Next to him, Ralston could hear Mona crying and whispering. She was praying while at the same time apologizing for her clumsiness. The man, on the other hand, didn't seem amused at all by the voices. "Are those beasts pursuing you?" he asked, outrage in his voice. "They are," Ralston said before he stiffened further. He could hear footsteps on top of the slope now. Just a second or two and they were caught. "Pursuing," the man hissed in outrage. "Children." And suddenly the temperature around them fell until Ralston could see his breath fogging in front of him. Then feelings creeped up inside him, telling him that he was in immediate danger. The footsteps on the slope faltered and stopped. "Why are you stopping, you moron?" another voice hissed. "We have to catch those two brats and bring them back to the castle." "There's something there, boss," the man who had been on the way towards the slope stuttered. "Of course there is, moron. Those two brats are there." "Something else, boss," the man replied, his voice shaking more and more. Ralston couldn't object to that assessment. The unnatural coldness in the air and the feeling of dread surrounding him told him as much. He shivered and the man pulled him closer before patting his hair as if Ralston was a pet. "Don't worry, little one," the man beneath him said. "Old Ecrisdis will look after you." The man patted his head again. "Even without my pets, I will make sure that nothing'll touch you," the man crooned. "Don't worry, little ones. Old Ecrisdis knows what he does." And with that, thick, unnatural fog started to well up around them. Ralston shivered even more. His whole being was screaming at him that he was in danger. Then the coldness seeped into his clothes, flesh and bones. He gasped and his breath was even whiter than it had been before. Then he heard the boss's voice again. "Something dangerous?" he scoffed. "Something dangerous? Are you a baby that you're afraid of a small slope in the dark?" "No, sir," the man replied immediately, "but there's something else." "Nothing in this forest is even the slightest bit dangerous for a wizard," the other man barked out. "This is a non-magical forest." "Oh, cough, sir," the man stuttered, and then his footfalls could be heard again, making their way through the dried leaves on the floor towards the edge of the slope. Ralston wished that he could stand up and run, but the coldness was paralyzing him, and the man's hands kept him in place as well. He shuddered again and buried his head into the man's chest. He wasn't willing to watch them being found and dragged back from where they came from. Silence reigned around them. The only thing moving were the dried leaves beneath their pursuers' boots while he climbed down the steep slope. The footsteps came closer and closer. Ralston shivered again. He felt cold to the bones, and yet there was something oddly soothing in the coldness of his body. It was like coming home after being away for a long, long time, and yet, at the same time, it felt like a sledgehammer coming down upon him, trying to knock him out, and he had to actually fight to keep his consciousness. There was also the fact that the longer he stayed entrenched into this unnatural cold, the more the whole experience gained a dreamlike essence. Then the boots of his pursuer crunched down the dried leaves just 2 or 3 steps away from them. Ralston shivered again. They were found. Ralston pressed his eyes tightly together. 1 second went by, the next. Silence. "Thumps, they're gone, sir," their pursuer said, stuttering. "I can't see them anywhere." The voice of his boss could be heard a second later from atop of the slope. "That's all your fault, moron," the boss accused. "If you had followed after them immediately, they wouldn't have been able to flee." "But boss," the man objected. "Shut up, moron," the boss's voice cursed. "We're going further and try to catch up to the brats. Join us as soon as possible." And with that, the whooshing of several brooms could be heard when the other wizards returned to their search, which led them further and further away from Ralston, Mona, and the man who rescued them. "Sir," the pursuer who had been forced to go down the slope cried out. "Sir, please don't leave me here alone." Ralston opened his eyes. Just 2 steps away stood the man who had followed them down the slope, his face terrified, surrounded by unnatural fog and coldness. "Those other 30 to 50 might be too much for me alone," the man beneath Ralston whispered. "But you alone, my dear, are easy prey, even with my pets so far away." With that, the fog around their pursuer thickened even further until Ralston couldn't see the man at all. "No, no, no," he could hear the man praying. "Please, no." Then there was a gasp, hitched breathing. The fog and cold got even stronger and took on an unearthly shine. The breathing hitched even further. Then a muffled scream, nearly silenced by the fog around them. And suddenly silence. Utter and undisturbed silence. Then the sound of something heavy falling onto the dried leaves and the earthy ground around them. Ralston stared blindly into the night. What happened?" he whispered fearfully. The answer was as soft as his question. "Nothing I will ever regret. Little one?" the man beneath him said, while baring his teeth in an expression which could have been a smile if not for the utter wilderness in the man's gazes. Like it was, it looked more like a challenging grin than a true smile. "Nothing I will ever regret." Ralston shivered. "You killed him," he accused. The man beneath him shrugged. Ralston could feel the shoulders shifting. "They're guilty," the man said. "Like every other adult, they're guilty. I don't mind killing the guilty." Then he sent Ralston another fearsome smile. "Guilty?" Mona asked in that moment, confused. "Guilty of what?" The man bared his teeth. "Of prejudice, of arrogance, of self-centeredness. It doesn't matter. They're guilty. That's all you need to know," he replied, unconcerned and absolutely self-assured of his beliefs. Ralston frowned. "But," he started to say, and the man laughed. "Don't worry, little ones," he said. "You will learn soon enough." Ralston doubted it, but at the same time he couldn't object that the man who had pursued them had been dangerous and maybe even evil. As much as Ralston abhorred needless killing, he could understand that the man had to die. If he had found them, it would have been them who had died at his hand, after all. Then the man beneath Ralston and Mona shifted and tried to sit up. He had removed his hands from Ralston's body and was now using them to help him sit up. Ralston took that as his cue to scramble to his feet. Mona, next to him, did the same thing. So the man who had been beneath them asked them with an interested gaze while the fog and coldness surrounding them slowly vanished. "How did you two end up here on top of old Ecrisdis?" Ralston and Mona exchanged a glance. Then Ralston squared his shoulders and answered. "We ran away from Hogwarts," he said, while fearing the man's reaction. Most adults never asked why, they simply wanted to bring them back there. Would this man be the same? "Ah," the man said. "Seems logical to me." Ralston blinked in confusion. "Logical?" he asked with a scrunched-up nose. It wasn't that he wasn't thankful for the man's reaction, but logical. The man, Ecrisdis, nodded. "Of course logical," he said. "Adults are in charge of that school. It's quite logical that children with brains flee from there." Somehow Ralston got the feeling that the man didn't like adults for whatever reason. "It's not because of the adults that we decided to flee," Ralston objected. "Well, not all adults, I guess. It's mostly because of the headmaster and his cronies." "Sounds like I was right, to me," Ecrisdis pointed out, and Ralston rolled his eyes and sighed. "Believe me," he said, "if it had just been because Hogwarts has adults in it, I wouldn't even have thought about running. Those people, they might look like adults, but they're actually monsters." That made the man blink. "Monsters?" he repeated before looking at Ralston thoughtfully. "I know about monsters. I met a monster child some years ago. He's the reason why my pets refuse to even set one foot on the Isles. You know, little one?" Ralston wasn't quite sure what the man was actually talking about. Ecrisdis, on the other hand, tapped his chin thoughtfully. "I understand the fear of monsters. I wouldn't dare to tell the monster child that I was walking about on his Isles without his permission, and I'm even abiding his rules while walking here." Then the man looked into the direction of the fallen and dead body of one of the pursuers. "Well," he amended, "I at least try to follow his rules." Ralston just looked back at the body in confusion. "Huh?" he asked while grimacing at the body. At least it was intact. It even looked more like the man was simply sleeping instead of dead, if he had been breathing, that is. Even from 3 feet away and in darkness, Ralston could see that the man's chest wasn't moving anymore. "No killing," Ecrisdis explained and grimaced himself. "The monster child doesn't understand that adults are all guilty by default." Then the man shrugged. "Oh well," he said, "I guess there is a reason why my pets still call him a child. I wonder how long a monster like him needs before he's grown up. Not that he will ever be an adult. He's a decent-born creature like me, even if he had the audacity to be born with phoenix blood in his veins." The man looked at Ralston. "Your headmaster," he said. "He was born with phoenix blood in his veins, wasn't he?" Now Ralston was utterly confused. Somehow he got the impression that the man wasn't quite right in the head. "No," he finally decided to say. "Why did you think he was born like that?" The man shrugged. "You called him a monster," he pointed out. "The only monster I know about is the monster child, and he is a monster because of the phoenix blood in his veins. Why would somebody be labeled as a monster because he had phoenix blood in his veins?" Ralston decided to ignore that direction of thought. "I called the headmaster a monster because he decided to experiment on us children," he said instead. "Some of them even died, and Mona—" He stopped and looked at the girl with him. She returned his gaze with her now calm and dreamy eyes. Ralston hadn't seen that expression on her face for quite some time, not since the headmaster had put her under that curse. Her silver blonde hair was a bit tousled and her robes were dirty, the Slytherin crest nearly lost within the dried dirty surrounding it. And yet she looked better than she had for months. It had been Samhain in his second year at Hogwarts when Ralston finally made the decision to run. Before that he had never even thought about running before. Rachel wondered if it had something to do with potions. In his first year, he definitely hadn't even considered running and telling somebody he was a Gryffindor, and Gryffindors shouldn't run. They should stay and fight. They should show true courage. Yet on Samhain, the Day of the Dead, his decision to stay and endure broke suddenly like a potions-induced haze fading. In the morning the day before, Ralston had been sure that he would stay and act like a true Gryffindor. It was his legacy to act like that, after all. His family had been brave for generations. Ralston had gotten the heir's ring of his family last summer. His parents had told him that it was time for him to get it, but Ralston had known the true reason. He had finally proven that he was brave enough and grown up enough to bear a burden like the heir's ring all by himself. His life in Hogwarts was just part of that burden. At least that had been his thoughts just the day before. Then Samhain had happened. And suddenly, nothing was like it had been before. Bravery sometimes also means to run away and get help. His ring whispered to him the moment he woke up after Samhain. "Didn't you feel the dead reaching out to you last night and urging you to run?" "I'm a Gryffindor. I don't run." Ralston had tried to tell himself, but his sudden and odd connection with the dead made him falter in his beliefs. Ralston's family had always been special. They were descendants of the first, descendants of the Grim. No rules bound them like other immortals. No creature born was ever like them. Ralston knew that as older ones, his family had lost a lot of their power, and only the heirs and lord's ring was capable of rekindling the flame that made them older ones. But it didn't matter. His family was different, and even while trying to hide their differences towards the world, they still stood out in one way or another. But sometimes, bravery means running, his ring whispered, relaying the words of the dead. Sometimes running is the bravest thing you can do. And this time, Ralston couldn't find it in himself to object to those words. Whatever potion or spell it had been that had kept him at Hogwarts and made him decide to suffer in silence had been broken by the protection his ancestor Peverell Grimm had woven into the heir's ring. So that evening, on the day after Samhain, Ralston confronted his dormmates with his plans. "We have to get out of here," he said while looking at the others in his dorm. "We have to go and find someone who will believe us." "Ralston," one of his dormmates said with a sigh, "there's no one who will believe us. Don't you think that others haven't tried? Those who ran died, and those who talked were silenced before someone believed them." Ralston, a young second-year Gryffindor, frowned. "But someone has to believe us," he objected. "We just have to get away and speak up for us, then someone will believe us." "You're a dreamer, Ralston," another one of his dormmates said, sighing. "Believe me, others tried to tell their parents or somebody else. Not one of them listened." "But what about the dead?" Ralston asked, confused. "What about—" "All explained away as accidents and whatever," the third dormmate said darkly. "I didn't even think about questioning it before coming here, you know." Ralston frowned. "But we are Gryffindors," he objected. "If we aren't brave enough to run and get help, who else is?" They argued back and forth afterwards, neither giving in, neither giving up. Ralston, for whatever else he was a stubborn child of 12. He was the heir of his family, and he had grown up with the burden that came with his family name. For him, thanks to the unique inheritance of his family, the fear of dying was nearly non-existent, and he simply couldn't understand why others feared people who threatened them with death. So of course he couldn't see the point his doormates were trying to make. In his eyes, you should respect death and live your life to the fullest, but you shouldn't fear it. When it was your time, you should accept it and greet it like an old friend. This was something his doormates couldn't understand at all. "Just let it be, Ralston," one of his doormates finally snapped after minutes of fruitless arguing. "Nobody is stupid enough to go through with your plans and get themselves killed. Just be glad if we don't go to one of them and tell on you." Ralston just frowned at the other boy. "Go and do it," he said. "I won't back down, and if I have to do it by myself, so be it. You are the ones who will have to live with the fact that you acted like cowardly lions." And yet it would take another week and a revelation he had previously not known about that finally forced him to go through with his decision. Hecristus was now frowning at Ralston. "So, that headmaster," he said slowly, "killed some children?" Ralston nodded while making himself a little bit more comfortable on the ground. It seemed like the man wasn't in a hurry to go his way or let them leave, so Ralston could at least be comfortable if he had to sit on the ground for a while. "That he did," he said. "He's experimenting on us," Mona added nearly silently. "Those new spells, he's the one who created them. He's trying to find out their limits. He's hoping that he's right and there are no counters for them, nor a way to make counters." She shuddered at that, and Ralston reached out to take her hand in his and squeeze it. He knew what she was thinking about. Her suffering had been the reason why he grabbed her and run in the end. Oh, logically he knew that others were suffering as well, but he couldn't take everybody, so he decided to take her and run. He was sure that if they just escaped, he would find a way to stop those monsters permanently. "Experimenting," Hecristus said, not sounding put out at all at those words, but then his mien darkened. "On children." Ralston didn't know what Hecristus had against adults, but whatever it was, it didn't seem to affect his belief that children were. "Yes," Mona said, shivering. "Experimenting. It's horrible." Ralston had been on his way to the dorms when he heard the voice coming out of one of the unused classrooms. "Imperio," the voice said. It was male, belonged to an adult, and definitely sounded like the headmaster's. Ralston frowned. For a moment he wanted to close his eyes and just walk by and ignore the classroom. Then his suspicion forced him to take different actions. He pulled out the invisibility cloak he had inherited from his father and slipped beneath it. Then he creeped towards the unused classroom. "Don't scream," the headmaster's voice was heard commanding through the door. "Do you truly want her not to scream?" Another voice spoke up in that moment. It was the potions professor's voice, and Ralston shivered at the tone of voice the man was using. It was beyond creepy and implied a wish for pain, suffering, and worse. "You can make her scream after I'm done with this experiment," the headmaster replied, dismissively. "But I want this done first. I'm not sure how much longer this one will make it, and I want at least some data before I need to find another one. So let's see which one of those two spells is stronger, will you?" "Of course, headmaster," the potions professor replied. For a moment there was silence, utter silence. Then Crucio. Ralston reached the door and looked inside the classroom. On the floor was a girl, silver blonde hair, a fair face and grey eyes. Ralston had seen her before but never truly interacted with her. She was a first year, and a Slytherin one, that is. With the slight rivalry between Gryffindor and Slytherin, he would have been teased mercilessly by his dorm mates if he had interacted with her, especially since she was a girl as well. Nevertheless, he knew her from seeing her in the hallways. Over the last 2 months, her once so dreamy eyes had dulled and lost its dreamlike condition. Until now, Ralston had never noticed that little fact. But watching her from the hallway while she was trashing around, silently crying in agony, made him notice her like he had never noticed someone ever before. It also made him angry. Very, very angry. "All right," the headmaster finally said in that moment. "I think we can safely say that both spells are about the same strength. We can finish this experiment for today." And with that he released his spell. The potions professor released his spell as well, and the girl slumped onto the ground as if her strings were cut. Neither of the two men looked at her. "I'm going," the headmaster said. "Finish up here and then leave her wherever. Just don't kill her tonight." "Anything else I'm not allowed to do?" the potions professor asked, and Ralston shivered again. Whatever that monster had planned to do, it would only increase the little girl's suffering even more, and increasing her suffering was what the potions professor wanted to do. "No," the headmaster replied, uncaring. "As long as she lives, I don't care what you do." With that he turned and strode towards the door. Ralston hurriedly stepped aside, suddenly very glad that he was hidden beneath his invisibility cloak. For a moment Ralston wanted to attack the headmaster, but then logic stayed his hands. He had no chance to win against two grown-up wizards with only a year of learning magic beneath his belt. But there was something else he could do. He could do what he should have done a week ago. He would flee, and he would do it tonight. Somebody would listen to him, and if it was just Ralston's father, Ralston would find a way to end the suffering of the children who were basically imprisoned into Hogwarts. But first he had something else to do. He had to end the suffering immediately tonight. The moment Ralston was sure that the headmaster was well and truly gone, he took a deep breath and then threw open the classroom door again. It had been hard to wait the minute he gave the headmaster to leave. From the inside of the classroom, the desperate begging of a girl's voice was heard. Still, Ralston forced himself to wait long enough for the headmaster to be out of earshot before he entered by throwing open the door. Ralston had not yet any spell in his arsenal that could take out another person permanently, but with his fury empowering his stunning spell, the potions professor was nevertheless catapulted through the classroom and against the opposite wall as if Ralston had used a banishing charm instead. The potions professor hit the wall hard and slid down to the ground unmoving. The tortured girl, on the other hand, stared at him dazed and confused. She was obviously in no condition to act on her own, so Ralston grabbed her wrist, pulled her up to her feet and then forced her to follow him running down the hallway. He felt his invisibility cloak dislodging while he rounded one of the corners in the castle, but before he could even think about grabbing it, a voice could be heard at the other end of the hallway. "There they are! Get them!" Ralston doubled his speed, his hand grabbing for the invisibility cloak but missing it. The cloak sailed to the floor and beneath one of the armors, and Ralston had no time to pick it up again. The headmaster, who obviously hadn't been away far enough to truly not hear Ralston rescuing the girl, was behind them and shooting spells at them. Ralston forced himself to double his speed, running away blindly while dragging a bewildered girl with him. They rounded another corner and another, and suddenly there was nothing but stone at the end of the hallway they were in. "Now we have you cornered," the headmaster behind them crooned. "Let's see what kind of punishment I will be able to think up for you." Ralston shivered, and he shivered even more when he turned around and saw that the headmaster wasn't alone. There, next to the headmaster, was the potions professor, who was bleeding from a head wound. Both adults smiled at them nastily. The girl next to Ralston whimpered. "Please no," Ralston pleaded. "Not with the two adults, but with fate. Please no, we can't stop here. Our flight can't end here already. Please." With that he pressed himself against the wall behind him. The girl still shielded by his body and now trapped between Ralston and the wall. Ralston's empty hand touched the wall. His other pointed his wand at the two adults. Those two smirked, one of them raising his own wand to disarm Ralston. The next moment, Ralston and the girl fell backwards through the wall and into darkness. The last thing Ralston saw before the wall closed in front of him was the shocked face of the teachers who had chased them. "We need to get help," Ralston explained to Eccrestis. "We need to get to London. We tried Hogsmeade already, but those people, they belong to the headmaster, and those who don't are far too afraid to do something." "You want to get help?" This time the man sounded incredulous. "From adults?" "Not all adults are bad," Ralston argued, while wondering what the man in front of them had encountered when he was young, that he thought all adults to be guilty. Meanwhile, while Ralston was trying to figure out Eccrestis, Eccrestis was trying to figure out Ralston. In Eccrestis's eyes, Ralston was an odd boy. Here was a child who had been betrayed by the adults who should have cared for him exactly like Eccrestis, and yet, unlike Eccrestis, he was still willing to reach out to other adults for help. It's a pointless wish, Eccrestis thought, feeling a bit sad for the naivety the child still displayed. Adult wizards, that is, are only good for one thing: food for my pets. Regretfully, Ekrasdis couldn't call his pets down upon them anymore. The Dementors were far too afraid of the monster child to step out of line. But then until tonight, Ekrasdis hadn't stepped out of line as well. His eyes went towards the dead man lying basically next to them. I think he might forgive me for that one, Ekrasdis thought. He's all for saving people after all. It was the thought of the monster child that brought another idea to Ekrasdis's mind, one that would be less fruitless than running to London to ask adult wizards to help. Ekrasdis already knew how that endeavor would end. They would be left standing as alone as before. It had always been like that after all. Ekrasdis had learned his lesson after being thrown away by his wizarding mortal mother and her family. They had cursed him, called him unnatural, and a demon child. The only one who had never seen his unnaturalness was his older cousin, until the day she grew up and changed. It was then that Ekrasdis had fled home in search for his father. He had never found his father, but he had found his father's race. The Dementors had taken him in and welcomed him as one of their own, even if he was but half a Dementor child. So Ekrasdis had gone and embraced his unnaturalness, and had started to hunt with the other Dementors for the souls of those they crossed. In his eyes, adults, especially adult wizards and witches, weren't good for anything else. Ekrasdis couldn't understand that the boy in front of him was still fighting this universal truth. We could do something less fruitless than running to London, he finally suggested. We could write the monster child. I'm sure he will come if we tell him that something horrible is going on inside this school you came from. Ekrasdis wasn't about to suggest that he could handle something from this magnitude alone. Well, maybe he could, but then the chances of having the monster child after his hide would be quite a bit higher than they were now, and frankly Ekrasdis liked to live. The boy just shook his head. My father or someone else will help us, he said with sureness in his voice. We just have to get to London first. There was no reasoning with the boy. Reminds me a bit of the monster child, Ekrasdis mused. Wonder if they're related somehow. All right, he said aloud, I help you to get to London. Normally Ekrasdis wasn't the most helpful of all people, but these were children, so Ekrasdis guessed that he could make an exception for once. The boy looked at him in surprise. How do you plan to help us to London? He asked. Ekrasdis waved it off without saying anything, and the boy's eyes narrowed. Apparition? He asked a little bit fearfully. Ralston definitely wasn't fond of apparition. The last time his father had taken him sidelong, Ralston had decorated the very expensive carpet of the Slytherin family. New, they had to throw it away afterwards. Some smells couldn't be gotten rid of with cleaning charms, and the carpet had not been made to be washed. No, Ekrasdis replied before pulling out a thin chain from beneath his clothes. He searched the chain and then removed one of the little charms that adorned it. This charm he offered Ralston and Mona. What? Minus? Put your finger on it, make sure that you touch it, Ekrasdis replied, and Ralston noticed warily the half-insane grin the older man spotted. What's this? Ralston asked hesitatingly while reaching out, and did what he was told. I call it a port key, Ekrasdis said proudly. I can teach you how to make one later if you're interested, little one. It's a good way to get away from adults before they hurt you. London. And with that they were off. Whirling and twirling through the air, only kept together by the little charm and their fingers attached to it. Then their wild ride ended, and Ralston and Mona tumbled to the ground. Mona blinked and looked around dreamily. What a splendid way to travel, she exclaimed while standing up. Ralston, on the other hand, groaned and hugged the ground. I'm never doing that ever again, he said muffled. This was as bad as apparition. Ekrasdis just snorted and returned the charm to his chain before hiding it away again. So, he said, we're in London, as you wished, little one. Where do you want to go now? Ralston blinked and then forced himself to look up and actually search the street they were in for something known. He had no trouble finding it. They were within the entrance to Diagon Alley, which had been shielded from non-magicals for a few years now. We're not far from home, Ralston finally said. We should go there first. The man nodded, but when Ralston finally stood, he spoke up again to say something Ralston hadn't expected. If it's near, I will stay here. The man looked around with a grimace. clearly unhappy that he was anywhere near adult wizards. If they believe you, you can come back here and fetch me. If they don't come back and we find another way. With this, the man grimaced again as if he couldn't fathom that he was even thinking about rescuing anybody. Ralston was sure that the man would have long since left them if the victims weren't children. But then Ralston had long since understood that the man he was dealing with wasn't one of the sanest people around. He guessed that he should be happy that the other man was helping at all. "All right," Ralston said, and then dragged away Mona towards his parents' house. It nearly felt like when they had fled the castle and he had been forced to drag her with him, just that this time around they weren't running but walking, and Mona wasn't hesitating, because she was dazed but because she feared to leave their protector behind. Ralston grimaced at that thought. Oh, how he wished he could have protected her earlier than he had. Oh, how he wished he could have left her behind in the safety they found unexpectedly within the school itself. When the shock of them falling through a wall had worn off, Ralston had forced himself to stand up and then pulled the girl he had saved to her feet. The moment he moved, the narrow hallway they were in lit up in one direction. Ralston frowned at that but in the end shrugged and decided to follow the light, hopeful that it wouldn't lead him into another trap after springing him from the last. It took another 20 steps until the girl next to Ralston finally spoke up. "Where are we going?" she asked him fearfully, and Ralston shrugged. "Following the lights," he said. "Hopefully they will lead us somewhere." So they started walking. About 15 minutes later, Ralston finally recognized what kind of narrow hallways they were following. "The servants' stairs," he thought, surprised. "I didn't even know that Hogwarts had any." But then you obviously couldn't enter them that easily. So Ralston guessed that it was no wonder they had been forgotten. "I wonder who hid them," he mused. This answer he gained another half an hour later. At that time, they suddenly ended up at a door. Ralston hesitated and first listened on the door to ensure that he couldn't hear anything behind it. There was nothing to hear, so Ralston opened the door slowly to take a look inside. Behind the door was a huge chamber, lit in green light and adorned with snakes. It also was empty. Ralston opened the door and they slipped inside. The girl's eyes widened when she saw the chamber. "The Chamber of Secrets," she whispered in awe. "There's a legend in Slytherin that our founder built a chamber inside the school to ensure that his children could find safety. I never thought that it was real." "It obviously is," Ralston said dryly. The girl shot him an amused look while Ralston looked around. "So this is built to keep the students safe?" he ensured, and the girl nodded. "Yes," she said. "It also has a tunnel to somewhere outside the wards, if you believe legend." Ralston nodded and looked around. He needed that tunnel. "Do you know where?" he asked her, interested. She shook her head. "No," she said, "but it's password protected." "Password?" Ralston asked with a little bit of dread in his voice. She nodded. "According to legend, you have to say, 'Father, give me passage.'" The next moment there was a grinding sound of stone meeting stone, and then a door opened at the base of one of the snake bodies. "Ha," the girl said, surprised. "Guess Daddy was right when he told me the legend of the chamber." Ralston, on the other hand, couldn't feel more thankful that the girl was with him. "Thank you," he said before hurrying towards the exit. "I go and get help. You, on the other hand, stay here and keep your head down, all right?" "I'd actually prefer to come with you," the girl replied in a dreamy but oddly enough at the same time steely voice. Said voice stopped Ralston in his tracks. He stopped, turned around, blinked in surprise, and then stared at the young girl in Slytherin clothing, who was now in front of him. "What?" he asked, confused. "I said that I'd prefer to come with you, if you have me, Potter," she replied. It was the first time that she actually acknowledged that she knew who he was. Ralston could only stare at her. She was tiny, blonde-haired and grey-eyed, more like a fairy than an actual human of blood and flesh, and yet so determined to come with him. There was an expression on her face that told him that she would follow if he left her behind, and that was something he couldn't risk if he didn't want her to be caught again. So Ralston stared at her some more. Then he opened his mouth and she frowned. "Don't you dare to object just because I'm a girl," she said. That stopped Ralston in his tracks for a moment or two. It actually wasn't the fact that she was a girl that disturbed him, but the fact that she was tiny, ethereal, and looked like a doll, and the knowledge that she had been tortured barely an hour ago. He finally started to say, but was interrupted by the girl in front of him. Mona Lovegood, she said airily, and I'm not willing to stay anywhere inside the castle any longer. I'm coming with you, if you want it or not. His eyes, still full of pain, now also filled with determination, fixated on him. Ralston shuddered. There was something supernatural in her eyes now that she actually stared him into the eyes. In the end, he could only do one thing. He gave in. "All right," he said, "but we will have to run long and far." She nodded, and together they left Hogwarts. Barely another 2 hours later, the headmaster's cronies found their trail, and the prowl was on. Another half an hour later, Ralston nearly faltered when the headmaster called out to him. "Running away, my boy?" he had called after them. "That's not the Gryffindor thing to do, Ralston." And yet Ralston would never regret that he decided to run away that day. While the children were fruitlessly off begging adults to help them, Ecristis decided to do something useful with his time, and wrote and sent a letter. "My dearest opponent," it said, "I came by some information that I thought you should know. Don't worry, I kept our treaty. Neither I nor my companions set a foot on the Isles at all. We stumbled over this particular information near Rouen. I am also quite aware that you have no reason to trust me, but then I have no reason to write you as well. It doesn't actually concern me after all. Yet, there is one thing I truly abhor. I don't mind killing people, I actually enjoy it, if you remember, but I abhor the mistreatment of children. There's something grave going on in that magical academy on the Isles. My informant spoke of the head doing things and using children for things that should never be done, let alone to children. I wouldn't have bothered if it had been an adult against another, but even I draw the line with children. I urge you to take a look. I'm even willing to help you, just this once, monster child. Sincerely alarmed, I asked her when we got to the cave. Ecristis of Azkaban. After he had written the letter, Ecristis looked it over again. "Meh," he said, "that should do it. I'm sure that as long as he doesn't find me here, I'm safe from his wrath." With that decision, he decided to send the letter off like it was after all never too careful if you decided to lie about your whereabouts to the man who was the magical lord of the Isles and who had basically banned your pets, even if he hadn't truly banned Ecristis. At least he will be willing to help, Ecristis thought while waiting for the children. Unlike the wizarding adults, he truly cares. Then Ecristis frowned. But then, he thought to himself, he's still a child according to the Dementors, and not human on top of it. I couldn't count him as an exception even if I wanted to. Ecristis was quite happy with that reasoning. He didn't trust wizarding adults, after all. When the letter reached one Salvasahar Emrys, now known as Salvatio Malfoy, the man was currently in London. He frowned at the owl who had delivered the letter. He had been wandering for the last 10 years. His daughter and wife were gone, and he had drowned his grief by taking up his wandering and helping out people. When the letter reached him, he had just returned to London with the idea to integrate himself into London's society again. But the letter changed everything. Sal again frowned at the owl. "You don't come from France," he accused it. The owl hooted. "You're far too well rested to come from France," he said. The owl hooted again. There was just one conclusion Sal could make from that. Ecristis of Azkaban was in London. "Rouen, as if he could deceive me with a few simple words," Sal murmured with a tired headshake. He wasn't too put out that the man was in London. Of course, if the man was there to kill people, then Sal would have something to say to him, but considering that no unexplained deaths had been happening, Sal doubted it. The Dementors, Sal knew, weren't on the Isles. Unlike Ecristis, they were bound by the contract, and Sal would have been notified that they entered the Isles. "Guess it looks like I have to deal with clinically insane again," Sal said, frowning to himself. Then he looked at the owl, which was wheeling around him happily and not at all tired, which just confirmed to him that the other man had to be in London, or else the owl would have been at least a bit tired. "All right," Sal said to himself. "Where did he get you from?" Sal looked around. Then he shrugged. "Best guess is Diagon Alley," he settled on. It was the most important wizarding district around London, and one of the only places near here where you could rent owls. Sal shrugged and decided to apparate to the other side of London to Diagon Alley. Sal was quite fond of apparating, even if every time he did it he was remembered of Andromeda's insistence that apparating was a death trap. It hurt still, but unlike with his brother's death, Sal was actually dealing with it. Nevertheless, apparition was quite useful. Not that Sal used it too often, considering how fast the world changed in his eyes and his norm of not coming to a place too often within a century. But since he had been in Diagon Alley reasonably close in his past, Sal guessed that he could take the risk of apparating into something and apparated. The first thing he actually saw when he landed in Diagon Alley was the insane half-Dementor Ep12 losing his footing, thanks to a young girl barreling into him crying. The boy that followed after her not too far looked as unhappy as the girl, but refrained himself from throwing himself in top of the two others lying on the streets. Ep12, on the other hand, looked for a moment as if he wanted to curse the girl before a resigned look crossed his features and he patted the girl's head instead. There, he said. Meh, it's exactly like I told you, adults won't listen to you. It's not that, the boy replied while kneeling down next to the still-lying Lord of Azkaban and the girl. It's more as if they're all unable to actually listen to us, you know. It's as if they're under the same influence of a potion that the other students of Hogwarts are under, and father isn't home, so I can't talk to him. The downed man frowned at the boy. You think that your father would be different? He asked. The boy shrugged. He's the Lord Potter, the boy replied, and Sal's eyes widened. As the descendant of the Grim and the wearer of the head's ring, he should be able to throw the potion of like I am as the heir. Sal's eyes widened further at that second sentence. He knew of only one family who was descended of a Grim, and that was Peverell's. It was startling to hear that the Potters were descendants of a Grim as well. On the other hand, you knew that, Sal reprimanded himself. You know your own heritage, after all. And yet he had never connected Peverell's heritage with his own, even if parts of it were identical. Thunderbird and Grim. Peverell had been family. This boy, barely a few steps away, was family, and not just because they shared a last name. No, the boy was family because he was a descendant of Peverell Grim. Ep12 said in that moment. Ah, yes, the Potters. He crooked his head and looked at the boy thoughtfully. At least you won't grow up into an adult, little one, he said, sounding satisfied. The Potters always managed to prevent that from happening as far as my pets told me. Something about having the ashes of the first Grim's blood in their veins. What a shame that you can't use those gifts anymore. Having Death's Son assisting us would be a blessing if we have to assault that castle of yours. Sal raised an eyebrow at that and decided that it was time to speak up. Before you plan to assault anything, could you please explain to me a thing or two? He asked sternly while staring at the still-downed man coolly. Said man yelped, half-jumped into the air while still lying down before landing in another heap on the floor when the girl's weight on top of him acted like a sledgehammer. It was an accident, the downed man exclaimed in the next moment, and Sal raised an eyebrow. The man blushed. Ah, well, not an accident, he corrected. More like an act of self-defense or whatever. But it was the legilimency probe that Sal sent out towards the other man that slipped through the man's mind's defenses and told him what the man was actually talking about. Sal pulled back immediately after he had received the information. I'm not here to punish you, Sal said with hidden amusement in his eyes. You wrote a letter. I came. The other man blinked at him blankly. But I sent that letter barely half an hour ago, he said slowly, and I tried to make sure that you thought me to be in Rouen. Sal just raised an eyebrow. That lie was quite hard to believe considering that the owl who gave me the letter was far too lively to have flown such a long time, he replied. Huh? The other man looked at him blankly and Sal sighed. I was already in London, he elaborated, and the man groaned. Why did you have to be in London? He whined. I didn't want you to think I broke the contract. It's not as if I brought my pet or killed someone. Well, I did. But it wasn't actually well. It was deliberately, but I did it in defense of me and the children. Sal just looked on in amusement. You haven't grown up at all, have you? he said, while at the same time feeling relieved that the man in front of him, while still being quite hateful towards other adults if Sal interpreted the looks the man sent them correctly, wasn't acting as unreasonably as he had when Sal had met him the last time. Sal could work with insane, but never with deliberately evil. "Tell me what that letter was about," he finally demanded of the spluttering man. The children looked at him warily. Ekrzdis, on the other hand, sat up and rearranged the girl inside his lap. "A monster child. These are my informants," he introduced the different parties awkwardly. "Little ones. This is the monster child I talked about." The children looked at Sal with unsureness clear in their eyes. Sal sighed. Then he wrote a quick rune sequence into the air and activated it to keep their conversation quiet to the other people who walked through Diagon Alley. Immediately, the onlookers who had stopped when the girl had barreled down Ekrzdis started to continue with their shopping. Sal loved the modified confundus he weaved into his rune sequence. After ensuring that their conversation was private, he spoke up. "I am Salvazahar Pendragon," he said, using the same name he had used back then to introduce himself to Ekrzdis. "Ekrzdis and I normally don't see eye to eye, but I guess I will have to make an exception to that for now." The boy started when he heard Sal's name. "Pendragon?" he asked, surprise and hope wearing in his voice. "As in King Arthur Pendragon?" Sal grimaced but nodded. "Pendragon," he agreed. "As in Prince Salvazahar Pendragon, heir to King Arthur." The boy just stared at him after his confirmation. "I didn't think that Britain still had a royal line," the boy finally settled on. "Oh, I knew that we had," the girl spoke up airily and suddenly a lot less nervously. "Daddy spoke about them. He said that our prince is simply giving us a chance to live our lives without his interference. If we muck it up too much, he will come back and take control again." Sal winced a bit at that. He had no wish to take up the crown. "Something like that," he agreed. "That's why I normally don't use Pendragon as a last name." The girl nodded gravely. "Then I call you Basilisk-born," she said airily. "Salvazahar Basilisk-born. I'm Mona Lovegood." Sal blinked for a second when the girl called him Basilisk-born, but in the end decided to just let it go. He had no intention to connect his old name Malfoy to Pendragon, and he actually didn't want to go through the whole trouble with explaining himself as Emrys again. "Well met, Miss Mona," he said instead, and she smiled. Then he looked at the boy next to her. The boy had brown eyes and the typical black Potter hair. Sal was sure that even without him knowing that the boy was related to Peveril, Sal would have seen it. The boy's nose and chin definitely just cried Peveril to Sal. "I'm Ralston Potter, my prince," the boy said stiffly and a bit nervously. Sal waved the title off. "Master Sal, or something akin to that, is truly enough formality," he told the boy. "Like I said, I normally don't tell people my family name." The boy smiled hesitatingly at him. "I guess you have a good reason for that," he acknowledged. Sal snorted amused before his face turned serious. "And now, please tell me what's going on in Hogwarts," he said, his serious eyes fixing on the children. Ralston looked at Mona. Mona looked at Ralston. "You won't believe us," Ralston said bitterly. "The other adults didn't believe us as well. They're all acting as if they were under a potion." The image the boy projected was so strong that Sal, even if he wouldn't have wanted to see it, would have seen it anyway. From what he saw through the boy's eyes, the boy was right. But Sal doubted that it was a potion. In his eyes it looked like a modified version of an imperious curse, and wasn't that a dark thought considering that the Unforgivables hadn't been part of the wizarding world until now? He also didn't think that the curse was on the adults but on the children to keep them from telling anybody. Sal could basically watch through the boy's eyes that every time the boy brought up the school and the students' treatment, some kind of haze lowered itself over the other person's eyes. It was an ingenious curse, and Sal would make sure that this was the last time this particular curse would be seen ever again. He knew that he would already fail with the Unforgivables, not that he wouldn't try, but he would make sure that at least this curse would be erased from the history books. "I will believe you," Sal said instead and looked at the boy steadily. "Just tell me what's going on inside the castle, and I will try and help you." The boy looked at him skeptically, but spoke up anyway. The moment he brought up the school, something seemed to reach out to Sal's mind, just to shatter before even reaching his occlumency barriers. Whatever curse it wasn't constructed to work on the mind of a Firbolg-born like Sal and Ecrisdis. When the boy was done, Sal was angry. Very, very angry. Sal couldn't even remember when he had been that angry the last time. Maybe never. That man, the man who called himself Hogwarts headmaster, dared to practice the unforgivables on children. He dared to experiment with the unforgivables on children. Worse, that man dared to experiment with the unforgivable on Sal's children. Children that grew up in Sal's home. Children that were Sal's to protect, as a teacher, as a prince, as the lord of the castle. It was his responsibility, bound by his oaths as a ruler, as a guardian, as a healer. Oh, Sal had fought before, but normally he fought with desperation. Normally he tried to protect. This time, on the other hand, he had to attack to even be able to protect, something Sal had never done before. But then, he had never been as angry as he was now before as well. Even the letter hadn't made Sal as angry as those innocent words from Ralston and Mona did. That was the moment Sal understood that he would do everything to eradicate that man from history. When Sal was done, Hogwarts would bear no remembrance of said man. Sal would make sure of that. Sal was surprised when his gaze met Ecrisdis at the end of the report. Ralston and Mona had given. "Will you let me help you?" the other man asked him earnestly. Sal returned his gaze with the same seriousness as Ecrisdis's face showed. "I will allow it," he said, "just this once." Ralston's eyes widened at that. "You believe us?" he exclaimed, surprised and happy. Sal's gaze wandered to the boy. "I do," he said, "and I will countervail his actions." Ecrisdis answered that exclamation with a smirk. The boy, on the other hand, looked at Sal with determination in his eyes. "I want to help," he said, and Sal knew that the boy wouldn't accept a no. Seemed like stubbornness might be a Potter gene. "I want to," Mona spoke up at that. Sal sighed and closed his eyes. "I could send for some of my pets," Ecrisdis suggested. "The little ones could look after them and ensure that other little ones aren't harmed by them." Sal looked at the other man incredulously. Sal had been right. Ecrisdis was insane. "You want children to command the Dementors?" he said blankly. The Lord of Azkaban shrugged. "The boy has the ashes of the Grim in his veins," he said. "He's an older one, and the one who isn't bound by the Immortals' rules. I'm sure that he can control them. And the girl, meh, she's weird enough that she'll get along with them splendidly." Sal wondered if insanity was infectious, because he actually started to truly think about the offer. In the end, he sighed and inclined his head. "I allow one exception from them as well," he said slowly. "If they do this, I will give them one boon. One time I will close my eyes and look away when they enter the aisles. One time when I won't kill them but only force them to leave after this time. If they come again afterwards, I will go through with my threat and destroy them all without mercy." Ecrisdis nodded. "I will ensure that they won't kill any of the little ones, and I will make sure that they know to obey those two little ones' orders," he told Sal. Sal closed his eyes and slowly nodded. He couldn't believe that he was about to enter a pact with an insane man so that two children could go to war and were safe at the same time. But then Sal also couldn't believe that he was about to assault Hogwarts. "Do that," Sal said, knowing that if he didn't give the children the possibility to work with them, they would do everything in their power to come anyway, and that might just end with the children being hurt, or worse, dead. So he turned to the children to look at them seriously. "If you are the ones to command the Dementors, I don't want you to take an eye off of them. You are responsible about who they will and won't attack. That's not something you can take lightly, do you understand?" Ralston and Mona looked at each other. Then both nodded. "We will ensure that only those who are guilty are attacked," Mona said dreamily. "Everybody else whose loyalty is in question or who is innocent we will make sure is either just apprehended or not harmed at all." At that Ecrisdis pouted. "It's not as if the adults aren't guilty anyway," he said slowly. Sal stared at the man. "We will do it as the children said or not at all," he replied. "If you want to do it differently, I will stop you and do it alone." It was mostly an empty threat, at least until Ecrisdis reached Hogwarts. Thanks to all the time Sal had lived there and all the magic he had cast there, Hogwarts was one of the few places all over Britain where Sal could act like he had more power than an above-average witch or wizard. Adding to that Sal was the master of the wards, well, it might be a better idea to challenge a dragon in their nest than Sal at Hogwarts. Regretfully, that was exactly what the current headmaster had done. "Go and get your Dementors," Sal finally instructed Ecrisdis. "The rest of us will meet you tomorrow at the gates of Hogwarts." It was late autumn in 1534 when Sal reached the outer skirts of Hogwarts' surrounding grounds. Now he was standing in front of the front gates of Hogwarts, contemplating his past. It had been years since he had been last seen the castle in front of him, and yet, throughout all his life, all those centuries, millennia he had lived, he had always returned to it. It was his home, and it felt definitely odd that he was now thinking about breaking and entering into it. But needs must. Sal thought darkly, his eyes searching out the one tower that once had belonged to Peveril. Needs must. Nevertheless, it was odd to Sal that after all these years working at Hogwarts, after all these years learning and living at Hogwarts, after all these years defending Hogwarts, he had now come to conquer it. A healer on warpath, Sal thought amused. That's not what you'll see every day. And yet, here he was, ready for battle. He bared his teeth in a semblance of a smile. But then, he thought, sometimes it needs to be a healer who goes to war. Sometimes only a healer will be the one to do the right thing, not the easy. And today was a day like that. Sal squared his shoulders. "Ready?" the man next to him asked. Sal took a deep breath. "Ready," he affirmed. His hands touched the black iron of the gates of Hogwarts. "Hello, Ep12," he greeted Hogwarts. "I've come to take your master down." And the old black iron gates slowly opened. Once again Sal took a deep breath, then he stepped forward and entered the grounds. The moment he crossed the wards, they settled heavily on his shoulders. A wind caressed his cheek, welcoming him home after the decades he had been away. Sal smiled, but his smile was more the goblin expression of baring your teeth in challenge than an actual smile. Then an alert went through the wards and told the headmaster that somebody had entered the sanctuary. Behind Sal, the children and Ecrisdis stood silently. Sal's smile broadened, and then he started his way up to the doors of the castle. The others, and the 10 Dementors they had with them, followed him silently like guards. Not even 10 minutes later they were intercepted by the headmaster, the deputy and the potions professor. "Who are you and what are you doing here?" demanded the headmaster. Sal looked at him, his face still adorned by an insincere smile. "I am Salvasahar," he said, "and I came to take you down." For a moment the headmaster actually gawked at him. Then the man burst out laughing. "You?" he asked, amused. "I can feel your magic, moron. You don't even have enough magic to be considered at an adult's level, and yet you want to take me, one of the most powerful men on the Isles, down?" Sal bared his teeth further. "It doesn't matter," he said, and fury laced his voice. "It's what you can do with your magic that counts, not how much magic you actually have. How about you face me first, weakling, and then try your hand on the headmaster, if you're still standing after that, that is." The potions professor scoffed and stepped forward. It was the Lord of Azkaban, who bared him his way. "How about you play with me, my sweet?" Ecrisdis crooned. "I'm sure we will have a lot of fun." The potions professor sneered. "And who are you?" he asked with contempt. "Ecrisdis of Azkaban," Ecrisdis replied. "Never heard of Azkaban," the potions professor replied. Ecrisdis smiled. "Oh, good," he said, "the more fun for me." And with that he raised his arms and suddenly unnatural fog started to creep up from the earth. The deputy and the headmaster turned their wands on Ecrisdis, but Sal intercepted the headmaster's spell with a ward, while the deputy fell to the Dementors commanded by the children. "We're going inside," Ralston declared with a determined expression. Mona next to him nodded, and together with the 10 Dementors they left, unhindered by the spells of the headmaster and potions professor that splashed against Sal's wards. The headmaster turned to Sal at that, his expression furious. "I will kill you, and then I will kill those brats," he raged. "Try," Sal countered icily while weaving one ward after another with his left hand. "In here," Inside the wards built by his blood and sacrifice, it was quite easy for him to weave other new wards. The ground was basically drowning in Sal's magic already, so connecting wards through the ground, weaving rune chains was basically child's play. It didn't need a lot of magic. Then the headmaster shot his first spells at Sol. Sal ducked and drew one of his daggers. The headmaster laughed. "You don't even have the power to use true spells," he scoffed. "You're weak, absolutely weak." The next thing he had to do was to duck when he saw a shadow jumping at him out of the corner of his eye. But when he looked where he had seen the shadow, there was nothing there. Sal smiled grimly before sending another illusion towards the headmaster. Again the man ducked, and Sol used his distraction to come at him with his dagger. The man managed to avoid being hit by Sal's weapon and started to shoot spells at Sal again. It was Sal's turn to duck away from the spells, all the while still weaving runs with his left hand. Then Ekrasdis next to him was hit by a curse of the potion's master. The half-Dementor stumbled, growled and pounced at the potion's professor. The headmaster shot a spell at Ekrasdis to stop him, but the spell splashed again against an invisible barrier. The headmaster growled. Sal used his distraction to come at the headmaster with his dagger again. When the headmaster stumbled back and away from the weapon, Sal's smile turned feral. The next moment Sal twisted his left hand, and a single golden glowing rune left his fingers. The rune flew onto the ground in front of the headmaster. The headmaster laughed. "That's it," he chortled. "One mangled rune, the only magic you can manage?" Sal couldn't fault the headmaster's logic. The man was far stronger magically than Sal ever was, considering that he was basically stuck with his 15-year-old body's magic. But Sal had learned one thing in his long life. He didn't need a lot of power. He had more than enough, and what he didn't have he could make up by his incomparable control over every drop of magic he had in his body. Sal wasn't weak, but even if he had been, his control would have made up for it more than enough. Wandless creating illusions was tiring, but manipulating wards that were already his. Child's play. The lightning bolt, which looked like golden electrified light, came down from the wards surrounding Hogwarts and hit the headmaster by surprise. Not that the headmaster had time to actually feel the surprise. One minute he was laughing at Sol, the next he was lying motionless on the ground, killed by the interacting wards he had been meticulously withdrawn from by Sol. The moment he was removed from the wards far enough, meaning he had basically lost his position as headmaster to Sol and was seen as a hostile intruder, the wards had come down upon him and had killed him. The potion's professor was so distracted by his employer's sudden death that he didn't even notice Ekrasdis ripping out his throat with his teeth until it was too late. Sal just stared at the two dead bodies in front of him for a moment or two. "Let's go and help the children," he finally said, and walked away from the battle towards the doors of the castle. Ekrasdis also looked at the dead bodies, wiped his mouth to remove the blood, and then he laughed. "Oh, monster child," he crooned, "now I know why my pets fear you. You are truly scary when you're angry." When people of later times asked what happened in the year 1534, they would get a lot of different answers. The Act of Supremacy, they would say, the beginning of the Church of England. Luther, they would say, his complete Bible was published in Germany in 1534. France starts to prosecute the Protestants, they would say, and Paps Paul III started his time as the head of the Catholic Church. Maybe other things would be named as well, but if you asked a wizard or a witch, their answer would be simple. Nothing, they'd say. Nothing important happened in 1534. Over time, the whole wizarding community would forget the assault of Hogwarts in 1534. Ralston Potter, Mona Potter née Lovegood, and Salvas Kahara Basiliscan, headmaster of Hogwarts for the next few decades, until one Antiona Crasworthy would take up the mantle, would make sure of that. Ekrasdis of Azkaban, on the other hand, would vanish back into Azkaban, where he would die sometime in the future. Only after his death, the wizards of Britain would find out about the island of Azkaban, and it would take even longer until they would turn it into a prison to the happiness of the Dementors. But until then, Hogwarts would return to being a safe place of learning for little witches and wizards. Look out, dung bomb. Herald Ralston Potter, what were you thinking throwing a dung bomb through the girls' washroom's window? Well, as safe as it could be with Potters in attendance. long. Between year 1500 to year 1899 AD, the moment Sal stepped into the room following his healer teachers, he recognized the woman on the bed. He hadn't seen her for hundreds of years, and yet he had never forgotten her face. She had been the only time traveler he had ever met who had traveled back for centuries exactly like him. Adding to that he hadn't been able to save her, there had been no way for him to forget her face. Staring at her again after all this time was unsettling and somehow bitter, considering all the time in the past he had tried to find a way to help her and hadn't found it. Sal stepped closer to the bed, watching the other healers weaving their wands over the unconscious body in the bed. Then one of the older healers stepped into the room, just seconds after Eloise Mintumble's eyelids began to flutter. "What's her status?" the master healer asked. "It doesn't look good, sir," one of Sal's female teacher healers said. "Whatever experiment she was part of, something went wrong quite horribly with it." In that moment Eloise opened her mouth and groaned. "What can you tell me about the experiment, sir?" the master healer asked the other man who had followed them in. Sal's gaze focused on the man who stood next to the door, wringing his hands agitated. "We were testing a new way to time travel," the man told them with tears in his eyes. "She went back in time and then used a device to return to the present." Sal closed his eyes. The unruly dark hair, the glasses, the face. He knew exactly who the man at the door was. The man was the splitting image of his ancestors, even if the one Sal knew hadn't worn glasses. Flamen Charles Potter, who preferred to be called Charles since his 3rd year in Hogwarts, Ralston Potter's descendant. The man looked defeated and so different, and yet all the same if compared to Ralston. "Back in time?" the master healer asked a bit disbelievingly. It was that question that made Sal remember his first meeting of the young woman in the bed and his life after meeting Ralston Potter. 2nd June 1568. In 1568, Sal finally was able to give up the mantle of power in Hogwarts again. Antiona Crazeworthy had been made headmistress after Sal died in the summer. Of course, Sal could have quit his place as a headmaster and simply moved on, but it was basically an unwritten rule that one was headmaster for life. There had been not a single headmaster before Sal who hadn't died doing his job as a headmaster. So Sal had decided to fake his death and give up his place as a headmaster that way. It was never good to stand out after all. The moment Sal had been free from his duties, he had changed back to a young man again and head for London. He planned to leave the Isles and return to the mainland from there. Regretfully, he was cornered before even thinking to embark on his next adventure. "Where are you heading, Salvatio Prince, without even thinking to say goodbye to us?" Sal sighed when he heard the voice and turned around to face the couple who had obviously found him before he could go through with his plans. "Mona, Ralston," he greeted the two of them. The two students, now long since grown, smiled at him in amusement. "My prince," Ralston greeted, but instead of unsureness, there was a hint of teasing in his voice when he used the title. Sal rolled his eyes. "I'm no one's prince, Ralston," he reminded the man. To his surprise, Mona snickered at that. Ralston just raised his eyebrow. "I'm quite sure that even if you're not acknowledged by the most of the Isle, your claim hasn't changed because of that," he said, amused. Sal sighed. "Can't I go back to anonymity?" he asked, half amused and half annoyed. "I think I have earned it after all those decades working with morons to ensure that the school was kept standing." Ralston snorted. "I bet that was truly hard work to do," he said, even more amused than before. "I remember that our son Harold wasn't the easiest child to deal with." Sal laughed at that. "He wasn't," he agreed, "but I knew that much already long before I met him. Any child with you two as its parents would be a handful indeed." "Indeed," Ralston snorted, amused. Then his face turned serious. "I heard that Sal Basilisk-born died," he said, not a hint of a smile on his face. "He did," Sal answered, sighing. "He was old, and he couldn't continue like that." Ralston just looked at Sal silently, and Sal wondered what the other man saw. Where just days ago had been, while locks and wrinkled skin, now the youthful, black-haired and green-eyed appearance reigned Sal's features. Not a lot of people will recognize you looking like you do now, Ralston commented. If it hadn't been for Mona, I would have had a hard time as well, and I saw you once looking exactly like you do now. Sal's smile vanished at that. I know, he said, nearly quietly. I'm sorry. Mona just laughed at his apology. Don't be, she exclaimed. I was always aware of the Eternal Prince. I don't mind seeing him at all. Sal raised an eyebrow at that, but in the end guessed that it was her blood telling her things like that. He was quite sure she was the descendant of an elf and gifted with the ability to see more than the average human. So you're here to tell me goodbye? He asked her, interested. Mona smiled. No, she said. We're here to invite you into our home for a few weeks or months. Spend some time with us as your friends, Salvatio Prince. We will not object when you want to leave later on. For a moment, Sal wanted to decline her invitation, but then he saw the same stubborn look in Ralston's eyes that Peveril tended to wear whenever he wouldn't budge 1 inch from whatever he had decided. Sal sighed. He knew that that look meant that he wouldn't win a confrontation with the Potters today. He sighed again. All right, he said slowly, but just for a few days. He would be cornered into staying for months. 199. Charles didn't seem to notice the skepticism of the master healer after his answer where Eloise had gone to, because he just nodded when the healer asked back in time, while tears started to run down his face. To 1400 he replied, sniffing. It should have been safe. We calculated everything. Sal closed his eyes at that exclamation. He had long since learned that even if you thought you knew everything, even if you tried to do everything to ensure that something didn't happen, there was always another way for things to come to pass. In the past, Sal had tried to keep the people safe he had known that were in danger. In his original time, the Slytherin family had ended, so Sal had always kept an eye on his son Mirden's descendants, hoping to prevent it. He had even gone so far to create a paterfamilias ring, something that had always existed for families of noble birth like Le Fay, Grimm, and even Pendragon, so that he could monitor the health of that family even from afar. And yet, with all the precaution, in the end the name of Slytherin had still ended up lost in time yet again. 31st October 1568. After Sal had finally left the Potters the previous day, he was back in London and on his way out of the country when he felt the disturbance. Something was off, and this something had to do with the Slytherin family. His paterfamilias ring, a ring he had gained when people forgot his original last name, Emrys, was humming and telling him that something was happening to his descendants. Sal did not hesitate the slightest moment. Concentrating on the ring, he let it lead him to where he had to go. With a soft pop, not quite apparition but something very similar, he vanished to the place the ring was leading him to. It was a house, a mansion to be precise. From where he stood it looked peaceful. The lawn was made quite beautifully, the flowers were blooming and the old bricks of the house emitted a friendly, warm atmosphere. The only thing that did not fit was the feeling of dread that his family magic was continuing to send him. It was screaming in his head that something was wrong, that something was happening to his family in this very moment. Sal ran to the door. The wards of the property were fading away under the pressure of the family magic, and finally they slid aside, letting him in without struggle. When he reached the door, he did not even try to open it. He simply threw a spell at it, pulverizing it to dust. The hallway was empty, but the door to one of the rooms stood open. In it he could hear someone moaning. He followed the noise and found a man in his mid-50s lying on the floor behind a desk. The man was bleeding from thousands of wounds, and he reeked of the darkest of magic. Sal crouched down next to him. He took the hand of the man, letting his magic fly free throughout the body of the other. The man moaned again. Then he opened his eyes. Who? He struggled to say. I am Salvaz, Fahar Slytherin, Sal said. I am the lord of the house. The man stared at him, then he coughed slightly. Sal knew that the man was in no condition to do anything right now. He had to heal him first before he could get some answers. Let me heal you, then you can tell me what happened. The man just shook his head slightly. She's still here, he rasped. My wife's sons. Find them. You will die if I leave you. Sons, please. All right, Sal answered, standing up again. He knew that the man would be dead when he left him now, but Sal wasn't just a healer, he was also a protector. The man had asked him to protect his family. If he was willingly deciding to die for it, Sal could and would not stop him. So Sal left the room, heading down the hall to the next. It was a dining room, and it was empty. After that he found the sitting room. Inside there lay the corpses of an old man and woman. They were lying on the floor, the man still holding the woman's hand. Sal let them be and headed on. He found the stairs and entered the second floor. In the middle of the hall lay a young woman, maybe the man's wife. Her abdomen was slit and her eyes glassed over. Sal ignored her when he heard a whimpering sound from somewhere down the hall. He ran in the direction he had heard the sound from. The door he had heard the whimpering from was closed. Sal did not hesitate. He busted it open with a spell, the runes for protection immediately on the tips of his fingers. The sight he was met with was gruesome. A woman was standing over the corpse of a maybe 20-year-old man. In front of her were 3 children, the eldest maybe 7. The eldest was shielding the younger ones. The boy was missing an arm and bleeding heavily from the open wound, but he still was standing in front of the other 2, trying to protect them. A tentative shield had been created between the children and the woman, but it was flickering and had started to slowly fade away. Accidental magic, Sal recognized instantly. Most likely done by the eldest, regretfully not strong enough to shield them much longer. The shield flickered again, then it vanished. Sal reacted instantly. He threw the protection runes at the boys, enveloping them with a golden glowing shield. Then he added a stasis charm to it so that the oldest boy wouldn't bleed to death until Sal could heal him. The woman in front of the boys stopped with the curses she had been throwing at the shield and turned. She blinked in surprise when she saw him, then she spoke up coolly. "Who are you that you think you can butt into family business?" Sal just looked at her. "Family business?" he asked with a voice a lot more frosty than hers. He knew that the wizarding world had changed, and like in the mundane world, some things were seen as family business. How people were treated within the family was normally the head's right to decide, and nobody had any right to tell them otherwise. Obviously, the woman in front of him tried to tell him exactly that. "Yes," the woman said, "the whole family is rotten to the core. The only one that is still on the right path is me. It is my duty to ensure that the family will return to the right path." "So you are family," Sal said slowly, his eyes narrowing before flickering towards the children who were still standing in front of the woman, eyes cautiously wandering from the woman to Sal and back. "Yes," she replied coolly, clearly believing he would let her be, "and now leave." Sal just raised an eyebrow at her, as if he would stand by and watch while she killed the descendants of his second son. For a moment he pondered on his answer. Then he decided to take the easy way out. "No," he said rigorously. She blinked, surprised. "Excuse me?" "No," Sal repeated firmly. When her eyes narrowed, he knew that he would have to go further to make her leave. Of course, considering that she had killed part of his family, he had every right to kill her on the spot, but as much as he wanted revenge, he would not kill her if he didn't have to. There were other ways, better ways to punish her. He pressed his lips together, then straightened. "You are the one who will leave," he demanded coolly. "From today on you will be banished from this family. You and your descendants will never be a part of Slytherin ever again. This I decide as the head of Slytherin." "As if you truly are the head of Slytherin," the woman snorted. Sal just extended his hand. On it was glowing the paterfamilias ring in a creepy green light. "I am Salazar Slytherin, founder of the House of Slytherin," he said icily, using that name the first time in centuries for himself. "It is my decision to banish you as you have broken the rule of family. Family does not try to kill each other." The woman just stared at the ring, then she laughed hysterically. "As if you could really stop me," she said. "I have borne a son. He will be the heir of Slytherin. I just have to kill these little peasants my brother's whore birthed." And with that she turned and threw a spell at the children. The spell was absorbed, but Sal wasn't too sure how many spells like that the shield would stop. She hissed in wordless anger and raised her hand for another spell. Sal reacted instantly. He did not draw his wand, instead he threw one of his daggers, stabbing her heart easily. She gasped for air, her hand raising to grasp for the blade stuck in her pretty corset and painting it red. Her eyes stared at the hilt in her chest, then she raised her eyes to look at Sal. He looked back at her evenly. She coughed, then she slumped on the floor. Her breathing was shallow and blood flooded the floor beneath her. Sal kneeled down next to her. "Never," he said coolly. "Never try to threaten me again. I am not called the darkest wizard in history without a reason." Of course, the words were just meant to frighten, but still, Sal definitely knew more than enough dark magic to be called the darkest wizard in history. That he also was a healer, and because of that, definitely not interested in conquering the world, did not count much after all these centuries. He stood up again when the woman's eyes glassed over and turned to the children. Without hesitation, he vanished the protection shield and entered the stasis. The eldest boy looked warily at him. "Don't worry," Sal said, raising his empty hands to show his good intentions. "I would not kill the descendants of my own son if I don't have to." The 7-year-old just stared at him. You are far too young to be Salazar Slytherin," he finally declared, eyes wide and fearful. He ducked the moment the words were out of his mouth, clearly unsure how Sal would react. Sal just chuckled. "I look like it," he said, "but as I cannot age, my physical age says nothing about my real one. And now let me see your arm." The boy stepped a step away from him. "If you're really Salazar Slytherin, you will kill us," he declared with conviction. Sal blinked at that sentence, surprised. "I will?" he asked, astonished. "Why would I?" He wondered what kind of rumors had started to exist about him that the children were that sure that Sal would kill them if he were Salazar Slytherin. "Because we are the children of a mudblood," the boy answered, disgust in his eyes while muttering the clearly hated word. He stared at Sal, clearly daring him to say anything. Sal just blinked. When and why had those rumors? Mine. He shook his head. Sal guessed that it wasn't important right now. "Well," he finally declared, deciding to go for the easiest understandable answer. "Then we should definitely be good in getting along." "Why?" This time it was the second eldest that spoke. "Everyone says that Salazar Slytherin hated mudbloods, and that father has disgraced his ancestor." Sal just snorted, disgusted by the rumors already spreading throughout the magical world about him. "Let those hypocrites say what they want," he said. "If you really want to differentiate between mudblood, half-blood, and pure-blood, then you will have to call me a mudblood as well, maybe a half-blood if you don't look too close." The answer were 3 hanging jaws. "You're a mudblood?" the eldest asked, astonished. But you are wearing our family ring. You told us you are Salazar Slytherin." "I am," Sal answered, "but being a mudblood or a pure-blood did not count at all when my relatives and I founded the school." "Relatives?" "I will not explain as long as you are still bleeding," Sal answered coolly. "Now let me see the wound." His voice had the ring of authority only a century-old healer could have, and the boy gave in. Since the boy had lost the arm, there was nothing Sal could do to recreate it. Even with the best potions, there was no way to get back a missing body part. So Sal just healed the wound like the others the boy had. "How come that you can heal?" the boy asked while watching him. "I thought Salazar Slytherin was a dark wizard." Sal just snorted. "The problem is the word dark itself," he answered the boy. "When I was born, there was not much that was called dark magic. Then centuries passed by and suddenly things I learned and used for years were labeled dark, so suddenly I was using the dark arts and was a dark wizard. It is silly, they labeled it dark just because they could not use it or something other irrelevant." The boy just stared at him. "So you're not dark?" the second eldest asked. Sal just shrugged. "I am a healer," he answered, "and I am a guardian. I do kill if I have to. But my most important mission is to heal. I do not think about the magic I use when I heal. When it is labeled dark, let it be labeled dark. I simply do not care. I learned a long time ago that being a dark wizard is nothing you should prevent. It is being evil that you should try preventing." The boys just stared at him. "But enough of that," Sal said. "There are more important things to speak about, like telling me who she..." The boys looked at each other. Finally, the eldest said, "She was our aunt, Lady Esther Gaunt, former Slytherin and the sister of our uncle and father." With that, the boy looked at the dead 20-year-old man in the room, the uncle. "I understand," Sal said, sighing. He was quite aware that it might take years and years for the boys to forget the massacre that had happened today, if ever. Sal was also quite aware that it might be quite a while until they wouldn't feel guilty for the death that had happened tonight. He didn't look forward to the reassurance he would have to do until the children would overcome this night. The Gaunts have started to call themselves the true Slytherins. The second-born boy spoke up in that moment. The youngest, he was maybe 3 or 4 years old, nodded with huge eyes. Sal was quite sure that the youngest obviously wasn't old enough to truly understand what was happening, but old enough to at least remember the talks of their parents and grandparents. "Our cousin often promised us to kill us when he is old enough," the second-born added forlornly. "And no one would protect us because our mother is a mudblood," the firstborn said, his eyes hard and challenging. "I understand," Sal said again, this time thoughtfully. "As if you really do," the eldest snorted, scorn in his voice. "Believe me, I do," Sal answered with a sigh. He knew that it would take time for the oldest to trust him, but he didn't have the time to gain their trust right now. He had to hide them from the Gaunts and the rest of the magical world, and to do so he couldn't wait for their trust right now. He closed his eyes and thought about the problem. There was just one thing he could do right now. "We have to ensure that nobody will come looking for you," he said, sighing, "and I do understand that that means you cannot live any longer as members of the Slytherin family. It is too dangerous to carry this name any longer." The eldest just snorted. "So you banish us too," he concluded, his voice bitter. Sal sighed and then just shook his head. "I would never do something like that," he assured the boy, "but I think it's best to let the Slytherin name be lost in time. Create a new name, and when you marry, take the name of your bride instead, yours. You might not be Slytherins by name anymore after that, but you still live and you still belong to Slytherin family." "And where do we live until we are all grown up?" the eldest asked bitingly. "I'm still too young to raise my brothers, and there is no one left." "Except of me," Sal finished the boy's sentence. Said boy stared at him. I will take you in as my sons until you are grown up," Sal said. "And don't worry, I actually do know how to treat children. I have been a teacher for a very long time, and a father." "You are not our father," the youngest cried, fear in his eyes. Sal sighed again and rubbed his tired eyes. "And I wouldn't like to try to be him," he answered softly. "Just see me as an additional uncle or grandfather. I will raise you until you are of age, but I will never try to be a father to you, I promise. I know how it is to lose a father." "Well, you might," the eldest answered bitterly, "but I am sure you were all grown up when you lost him." For a moment, Sal didn't know to answer that accusation. Then he decided to go with the truth, at least for the most part. He definitely wouldn't talk with 3 children about his time travel if he never even had told his wife Andromeda or the other founders. "Yes and no," Sal answered finally. "I was born as the son of 2 fathers. The first I lost when I counted 1 winter, the other I found when I was 2 times your age, and lost him when I was all grown up. Believe me, I know what it's like to be an orphan. I have been one 14 years of my childhood, and even more as an adult." The boys just gawked at him. "And now what are your names?" Sal asked again. The 3 boys looked at each other, then the eldest said hesitatingly, "I am Seraph Severus, and these are Salazar Charles and Mirrodin Neville." The eldest first pointed to the second eldest, and then to the youngest. "Well, a pleasure to meet you, Seraph Severus, Salazar Charles and Mirrodin Neville. I am Salazar Shah Ha Serendu Harry James, better known as Salazar or Sal, at your service," Sal replied, forcing himself to smile to look a bit more approachable. 4-year-old Mirrodin Neville giggled. "I never heard someone really saying 'at your service' before," he said, snickering. Sal just sighed at that. When had those words changed again? He had been in Britain, and yet hadn't noticed the change nevertheless. "Well, I was raised more than 2,000 years ago," Sal finally settled on with a sigh. "I grew up with different mannerism than you. I will try to teach you the modern mannerism, though, but I cannot promise that it still will not be a little old-fashioned." The eldest just shrugged. "I can correct you," he said suddenly. "A lot calmer and a lot more grown-up acting than before." Sal smiled a bit at that. "If you wish," he agreed. "But I still think that we should add some more people to our little circle. I know a pair or 2 who will be delighted helping to raise you." The three orphans looked at each other skeptically, but in the end, the oldest nodded. It wasn't as if they had a chance to decide for themselves. Sal was the head of their house, and the only one of their family still alive who could take care of them. But what about our parents and minus? Sal looked at the children in pity. He knew that there was no way to bury them with the children present, or even without. The family needed to be dead legally to the wizarding world, so there was no way that he could allow a burial without a reasonable double for the boys. But then maybe, I might have an idea, he told them softly. You won't like it, but it will be a way to hide you away and ensure that nobody will come looking for you. In the end, Sal called his patroness and told it to go and bring Monna, Ralston and maybe the Flammels. The children just watched, while Sal left to look around for the other people in the house. The man he had found alive before was long since dead. Sal was quite aware that the man had to have bled to death even before Sal had even found the children. Sal refused to have the children walk around the house as well. He had removed the uncle's body from the room and had told them to stay where they were. He didn't think it to be a good idea for the children to see their other dead relatives in the state they were in. It didn't take long for help to arrive. The wards on the property, now deferring to Sal, told him immediately who was outside. Sal was quite sure that if the woman wouldn't have been part of the family, not one of them would have been surprised by the attack. Like it was, not one of them had seen her as a threat until it had been way too late to stop her. Sal opened the door to the people in front of it. Uncle Nick, Tante Perenelle, he greeted the couple. You're surprisingly quick to answer my call. The Flamels exchanged a glance. We were in London already, Perenelle said. There's a Wizards' Council meeting in a few days, and we planned to attend. We were also quite intrigued by the spell you used, Nicholas added. I have never seen such a way to send a message before. Sal frowned. It's the Patronus charm, he said, concerned. If you don't know it, I should teach you as soon as possible. It's way too dangerous for you to walk around not knowing it, considering the neighborhood we keep. Perenelle looked at him in amusement. Neighborhood? She asked him. Sal sighed. Azkaban, he elaborated. It's the home of the Dementors. This wiped the smile off of Perenelle's face. Dementors? She asked, concerned. The Dementors near the Isles? Sal inclined his head. They won't enter the Isles if they know what's good for them, he told his aunt. But even like this, it would be best to know the charm just in case. Oh, Nicholas replied dismissively. We know the charm. Perenelle nodded with a smile. We were just intrigued how you got it to speak, Nicholas added. That caught Sal's attention. Got it to speak? He asked, confused. I didn't try to. He was interrupted by the arrival of Ralston and Mona. How did you get the Patronus to talk? Ralston asked the moment he appeared. Sal opened his mouth to tell him that he had no idea how he managed it, when he remembered the reason why he had called the two couples originally. Not important, he said instead of his planned answer. I called you here because I need your help. Perenelle and Nicholas exchanged a glance while Ralston and Mona did the same. We're here and we're listening, Nicholas finally settled on. What do you need? It would be a long day, but at the end of it, the once marvelous manor of Slytherin family would be given to the unforgiving Flames. The valuables, on the other hand, were packed and then brought to Gringotts. It didn't take long to actually explain the king of the goblins what they needed. It can be arranged, Morganeth, the goblin replied, his eyes never leaving Sal's. Give us a new last name and we will create a family for them, one thought to be extinguished for at least 300 years. With you as the head, it should be no trouble for us to hide the truth from prying eyes. Sal inclined his head in gratitude. 'Tis would be most welcome, he replied. As for the name, make it Prince, Mona added. We already invited Master Sal under that name to our manor a few months ago, and his present and name have since then travelled throughout our community. Nobody will look twice if they find out he has some children of his own. The children with them looked a bit uncertainty at Sal. Sal, on the other hand, shrugged. I won't take the decision from you, he told the children. It's your choice to make. It's your choice to decide on a new last name. The oldest looked at him gratefully at that and then nodded. My brothers and I will talk about it, he said, and gestured his brothers aside to do so. After that day, all the valuables of Slytherin would be hidden away in a hidden vault of the Prince family. With goblin magic and a ritual, the boy's ancestry was hidden. Sal was sure that if he raised them to be druids instead of wizards and would guide them through an awakening, nobody would be able to connect the prince children to the Slytherin children in the end. You should leave the Isles for a while, Ralston suggested as well. Nobody will go looking for them anywhere else on the country. Nicholas nodded. You can come and live with us, he said. You know we're always delighted to have you, Salvatore. And the children as well, of course, Perenelle added and smiled at the three boys. I'm quite sure we will be able to make some proper French gentlemen out of you now. In the end, Sal took the invite and left with the boys for France. He wouldn't return until the first of the children was entering Hogwarts. By then it would be a well-known fact that the Slytherin family had perished, and that the Gaunt family had somehow lost all their claims to said family, implying plain and simple treachery, even with the Gaunts trying to deny the truth and spreading lies. It would be many years until the lies would be believed. By then, the Slytherin family was long since gone, and the Prince family was a fixed part of the Wizards' Council. Of course, the fact that the Prince family's head, one Salvatio Prince, would be a staunch advocate for the International Statute of Wizarding Secrecy was part of their reputation of an ancient house. Said head of house had been partly responsible, together with Ralston Potter, who served the Wizards' Council from 1612 to 1652 as well, for the laws that would have governed the wizarding world for the next centuries. Even if there would always be people objecting to the statute in the end, so many of them agreed it had been the better decision in the contrast to the more militant peers who wished to declare war against Muggles. Finally, many years later, the Prince brothers started to settle down. The youngest, Maiden Neville, going by Neville, met a young witch who was heir to her family name. He married her out of love and took her name. Like that, the Longbottom family became the third heir of Slytherin. The same happened to the second-born, Salazar Charles, going by Charles. He would give his status as the second heir of Slytherin to said family and take on their name of Prudit, a family which many centuries later nearly perished at the hands of Voldemort, a family that would resurrect with Charles Prudit née Weasley, second-born son of Arthur Weasley. The only one who decided to keep the prince name was Seraph Severus Prince, going by Severus the eldest. He was the first true prince and like that should have been the actual founder of the house, a house that was born out of Slytherin and that Seraph Severus hoped would return to that name when the time was right. The house would nearly perish at the hands of its own descendants, the name lost when the last daughter of the house married a Muggle. Her son, the potential heir, was refused by her parents and like that would stay a Snape until his 30s. Two other houses would be born out of the Prince house over time, the House of Greengrass and the House of Zabini. They also would follow the call of the House of Slytherin the moment it was bound to return. But that would happen many years in the future. Until then, centuries passed, and Sal would go from being called Master Sal by the children to being called Father. He would go from being the father of 3 children to being the father of 3 adult children, to being a grandfather and finally having to bury his sons. There was just one promise that he held on to from the day he adopted the last heirs of his second son. He had once promised them that one day Slytherin family would return, and he knew he would hold on to his promise, even if it would take centuries to being able to follow through with it. And so it came to the rumors that the Gaunt family were the only heirs of Slytherin, and that they were the last ones left of the formerly great family. 1899. While the master healer still looked skeptical at Charles's answer that Eloise had gone to the 1400s, at least one of the nurses seemed to understand what the silvery robes Charles was wearing actually meant. "They're from the Department of Mysteries," she whispered nearly silently into the healer's ear, and the healer's skepticism vanished. His face smoothened out, and instead of voicing his disbelief, he calculated the time between the time Eloise went to and the current time. "So she went back about 500 years, the healer said. "And she's aging rapidly," the female healer said. "It seems as if she's aging a far greater speed than she should, and we can't stop it at all." "Please," Charles pleaded, "isn't there anything you can do?" "I'm sorry," the female healer said, sighing, and Charles started to cry in earnest. Sal closed his eyes again at the answer. He knew that it was the truth. Even he, with the experience of millennia, had no chance at healing her. He sighed and closed his eyes. "You know it has to happen," the wind whispered into his ear. She decided to leave time and escape her destiny. Now she has to suffer for it. Sal couldn't object to that assertion. He knew that the moment Eloise had decided to use the device she had gotten from the other unspeakables, she had been lost. Of course he had tried to find a way and help her anyway, but some things simply weren't meant to happen. Sal had learned that long ago. "Don't blame yourself, my balance," the wind whispered. "Your destiny is to guide the others around you. You might have been born for more. You might have to decide your destiny in the future, but right now there's nothing you could have done that could have helped her in any way or form. That doesn't change the fact that I still wished for a way to help her," Sal answered in a whisper. The answer was a laugh. "You will always wish to help," the wind said, and caressed his hair even if it shouldn't even exist within the rooms of St. Mungo's, even if you have to suffer for it. Sal sighed but couldn't object. After all, he was basically standing in the one place that confirmed the wind's accession best. St. Mungo's, 1666. 15-1 and shines. Sal had been wandering for the last 15 years. After establishing the International Statute of Wizarding Secrecy, he had finally left the Isles, feeling quite imprisoned by the land at that point in time. He hadn't been stuck in one country for such a long time in centuries after all. Sal had been sure that he would not return to the Isles for at least a century after he finally escaped them, so he was quite surprised by himself when he found himself in London, barely 15 years after his flight. On the other hand, it wasn't surprising at all that he was there. The plague had hit London, and Sol's healer instincts would have protested more than loudly if he hadn't been there to help. The plague was infecting wizards and muggle alike, and both of them died the same way without any chance of healing. Fever, headaches, swollen lymph nodes. Yet no treatment that mundanes would accept and not call witchcraft. Yet no wizard or witch would acknowledge that they were as affected by the plague as mundanes. Sal hated it. Sal hated the Middle Ages. Sal hated the people, mundanes and wizards alike. He hated the mundanes for their narrow-mindedness and fear of the devil and witchcraft. He hated the wizards and witches for their beliefs that their magic would shield them from a mere muggle illness. Arrogant, the lot of them, Sal cursed nearly silently while he cast one spell after another to treat one of those wizards who had given in and gone to him for treatment. The plague was still spreading, and as much as Sal tried to at least reach and warn the wizards and witches, he was mostly ignored by all of them as just another idiot who had no idea what was going on. Sal was frustrated by that fact. He was a trained healer, he was bound and marked by his oath, yet people ignored his warnings as if he was nothing but a little undereducated child. Idiotic, ignorant children. Sal cursed nearly silently while trying to determine what potions could be used for the man in front of him. He could treat the symptoms with fever reducers and other potions, but he had yet to find a potion that actually helped with the plague itself and not just its symptoms. Yet even with the treatment of the symptoms and some experimental potions he was still in the process of developing and testing, he was able to do more than all the other uneducated wizards and witches who had stopped learning after Hogwarts. Arrogant magicals, Sal grumbled, as if Hogwarts teaches everything you need to know. The wind laughed at him for that exclamation, and Sal rolled his eyes. Sal knew that if others would just listen to his warnings, he might even be able to save some of the infected wizards and witches, but nobody listened. Unlike muggles, wizards had a slightly different biology thanks to the magic and their creature inheritance, even if it was centuries in the past and nearly dormant, and thanks to that the chances of healing them should have been way better than the chances of healing the muggles. Even the chances of squibs should have been better, because even with fully dormant creature genes they still had the potential and were different than normal muggles, and yet both of them died as fast as muggles. Stupid, arrogant wizards, Sal cursed nearly silently again while he forced some of his potions down his patient's throat. If they just had bothered to fully train more than one wizard a century in the healing arts, it would have been so much easier to treat all those people. Unfortunately, it seemed like they hadn't, or the wizards and witches trained as healers all had left London already. Which would be stupid considering that they're needed here, Sal thought darkly. It's not as if I can treat all of London by myself. Sal sighed and shook his head. I just wish there were other trained healers around here, he murmured to himself, exasperated. It shouldn't be too hard to find some who have at least some training in the healing arts. There have to be at least some in training around here. But training them needs somebody who can train them, my child, the wind whispered, and Sal stopped in his treatment to look around and find the voice speaking to him. There was something familiar, and yet so foreign in this voice that Sal just had to stop and listen. Nay, Peverell, child, the wind had whispered once, but it's not his time yet. He can't be claimed by death until the circle is fulfilled. Who are you? Sal whispered, and the wind laughed at him. So you remember me, Salvazaha, the wind whispered in Sal's ear and caressed his hair. It just tells me about your strength, that you can remember me even after I shielded your memories from yourself. You truly are the perfect balance for me, my child. Sal looked up, staring into the darkness of the night. There was something so familiar to the wind, something so soothing that he automatically bathed in it. It felt like coming home after a long, long time away. It felt like being soothed by his fathers. It felt like the memory of being held by his mothers. He closed his eyes, letting the wind play with his hair. I know you, he whispered. The answer was a whispery laugh from the wind. That you do, my balance, the wind said, caressing Sal's hair. That you do. Sal sighed and then opened his eyes again. Who are you? He asked the wind, his eyes searching the empty night for the reason of the voice. The voice laughed again. It's not your time yet, the voice said. You will know the answer when it's time for you to decide your path. Then why are you here if you don't want me to know? Sal asked, confused. The answer was another wispy laugh from the wind. Because you're in the middle of my current territory, the wind said, and I couldn't resist to visit you and ensure that you'll do everything you can to keep my balance. Sal frowned at the wind. What do you want me to do? He asked, a bit concerned with the words of the wind. The wind caressed his hair. I don't want you to do anything you don't want to do, it whispered, amused. I just came to see you doing your work. My work? Sal whispered, confused. Again the wind caressed his hair. You have chosen to be a healer millennia ago, the wind caressed. You are my balance. It doesn't matter how you achieve that, it just matters that you do. I don't understand, Sal whispered, but the wind just laughed at Sal, amused. Not yet, the wind said. Not yet, my balance. Don't worry, you don't need to know. As long as you follow your path, you will not need to know who I am for a long time yet. With that, the wind vanished from Sal's awareness, leaving nothing but the memory of Sal's exasperation about the missing magical healers of London and the vague feeling of home in Salvasa's mind. Stupid wizards and their inability to see that there's no way that magic will protect them from the plague just because they're magical, he murmured, exasperated. Then he turned his attention to his new patient. The man was a wizard and as bad off as the one Sal had treated before. His was shivering, thanks to the fever. He had huge blister-like swellings under his armpits and on the neck, both clear signs of the plague. Sal sighed, forced the man to drink the potion he invented to treat the plague. It was still experimental, but better than nothing, and it seemed to help at least a bit, and then used spells to ensure that the man was not only clean, but also in a bubble that would ensure that he wouldn't infect others and keep his temperature and body condition monitored. He wasn't about to drain or incise the blister-like buboes of the plague. It wasn't the first time Sal was confronted with this particular malady, and he had long since learned that treating the buboes by drainage or incision, the infection had just the ability to spread further and infect more people. A lot of healers or quack doctors, who had no idea about that and didn't listen to Sal when he warned them, died thanks to trying to do just that. And that's the reason why I hate the Middle Ages. Sal mumbled darkly. Stupid, arrogant wizards. We've thousands of charms to shield us against an infection, even going so far to never touch the patients, and yet, there they are, not more educated than the mundanes. Sal sighed again and rubbed his tired eyes. Since he never touched the infected people he treated, if he didn't have to, and always made sure to wear dragon hide, charmed clothes so that the infection couldn't spread to himself, if he had to, he was quite safe to touch his eyes without any precautions. If I continue like that, I will be truly earthbound to London, he said darkly to himself. Then he rolled with his shoulders. Well, at least then doing spells in this area will get a lot easier than it is right now. Until now, his best spot in London when it came to manipulating magic through Earth, like his elder dragon heritage demanded, had been Diagon Alley. Sal guessed that that would change in the future considering all the healing he was currently doing all over London. He sighed again and closed his eye before forcing them open again. He had no time to sleep if he didn't want his patients to die. He was already dangerously tired. He had been treating people all alone for months now, and he had been without proper sleep for at least as long as that. This isn't right, Sal murmured to himself. I'm just one Firbolg-born, one magical, and there are thousands out there. It isn't right at all that I'm basically the only one who's out there healing people. Of course, Sol had the experience of millennia, unlike other healers who were barely trained, but that didn't make up the fact that even half-trained healers would be some kind of help while the plague was spreading in London. Sal knew that maybe a lot of healers didn't dare to treat something they knew nothing about. He knew that some of them were maybe too untrained to even start treatment. Yet, some help would be appreciated nevertheless, Sal mumbled darkly. I'm not all-powerful after all. Well, a voice spoke up behind him in that moment. You certainly don't look like it. Sal wiped around, drawing his wand with one hand and the dagger with the other while turning. The man's eyes widened. He raised his hands and stepped further away from Sal's back to show him that he wasn't a threat. Now that Sal could see him, he saw that the man he was confronted with was actually more of a boy, maybe 2 or 3 years older than Sal had been when he had been thrown into the past. Nevertheless, Sal continued to watch him warily. He wasn't stupid enough to believe that just because of his youth the other man was harmless. Said young man raised his hands to show he was weaponless. I'm sorry if I startled you, the youth said. It wasn't my intention. Sal's eyes narrowed. If it wasn't your intention to startle me, tell me what are you doing behind me, watching me, he asked distrustfully. Sal knew quite well that if the young man was a mundane, the chances that Sal would be suspected of witchcraft or something like that were still high. Not too long the whole European mundane world had still been in the peak of the witch hunts, and Sal wasn't too sure I wouldn't be prosecuted if the youth was indeed a mundane. I was interested in your work, the boy rambled, looking suddenly quite nervous. I understand that you're a healer, and there might be some secrets I shouldn't see as someone untrained, but I've always been interested in healing and, well, I'm just out of Hogwarts and Master Healer Avery refused to take me in and train me, since I'm mundane-born and actually can't afford training. When I saw you working I just thought, just one look. Sal was surprised at the longing in the boy's eyes, but it was the boy's rambling that made him look at the boy with a frown. Master Healer Avery? He repeated. The boy nodded and ran a hand through his hair. He's the master of London, he said. Every practicing healer in London has to follow his lead. You should know this as a healer yourself. You should have gone to the master of London and asked for permission to practice your arts in London. Sal frowned at the boy. I never asked anyone for permission to heal, he said coolly. I won't start now. This time the boy returned the frown. So you've not sworn your healer's oath? He asked, concerned. Sal understood the boy's concern. Without a healer's oath, it was far too easy to bind the people you saved to yourself with a life debt. Sal sighed, but tipped his chest to activate a visible form of his healer's oath on it. The light of the runic circle shone bright even in the brightly lit the improvised hospital wing. The boy stared at Sal's chest in awe. The healer's oath couldn't be faked, and even Sal's slightly different version, he was a guardian healer, not a simple healer after all, was recognized even by magicals who had never seen a healer's oath ever before. Then the boy frowned. But since you've sworn the oath, how can you work when the Master of London hasn't given you permission to practice in London? The boy asked, confused. Sal understood the confusion far too well. He wasn't looking that old, and his appearance spoke of missing experience. A healer was bound by the oath, and the oath decided their rank within the healers working in the same place. The more experience, the more important a healer was, because with more experience, he would be commanding more healers in a grave situation, and at the same time he would be given more complicated cases to treat. Sal knew that his oath would tell the other healers and potion masters who were also bound by a slightly different oath to obey without asking if the need arose, exactly like it had done for millennia now. Sal looked at the boy with amusement. The Master of London doesn't have any power over me, Sal said with a shrug, as an explanation for the boy. He can't order me around, so if I decide to help, it's my decision, and my decision alone to aid. I'm not bound by the decision of anybody else. The boy looked at him in surprise. But how? He whispered, confused. Sal hesitated for a moment, but in the end decided that speaking the truth would be the right thing to do for now. A healer is bound by experience, he said. As long as my experience surpasses the experience of the Master of London, he won't be able to force me to do anything. The boy looked at him in surprise, then the boy's eyebrows furrowed. If you can defy the Master of London when it comes to healing, are you able to defy him when it comes to teaching me? There was hope in his voice when he asked that, and Sal closed his eyes. He was in the middle of fighting the plague. This wasn't the ideal place to start with the teaching of an apprentice. On the other hand, the boy had been refused by the Master of London, so the chances of him ever reaching his wish without Sal were nearly non-existent. Sal sighed and closed his eyes. "What's your name?" he finally asked, already halfway on his way to accept that he would teach the boy his profession. "Mungo Bonham," the boy replied. "My name is Mungo Bonham." Sal smiled at the boy. "I am Salva Sahar Prince," he replied. Then he closed his eyes again. He knew that he wouldn't be an ideal master when it came to teaching the profession of a healer. He had been trained by Morgana and had never searched for another master after that. He had created his own techniques, his own way of healing. There was no way that he would be able to teach the boy in front of him, the way of the healers of his time and age. But maybe that's not too bad, Sal thought to himself while looking back at his patients. Maybe it needs something different if the healers of London sat by and did nothing to help the ill. He looked at the boy in front of him, frowning. "How old are you?" he asked the boy. This time the boy frowned. 18, he said hesitatingly. "I'll be 19 in a few months." Sal sighed again and closed his eyes. He knew that the boy was too old to actually learn the way of the druid like he had learned it. The boy was too close to his second maturity to start learning the old way like Sal had learned once. The boy seemed to read something in Sal's eyes because he closed his eyes in resignation. "You won't train me, will you?" he asked, resigned. Sal sighed. "No," he finally decided, and the boy's face started to fall before Sal continued with his exclamation. "I will train you. But it won't be easy, and I fear it will be absolutely different to the training other healer apprentices receive. I've not been taught like them, and I can't teach like your healers do. If you can accept that, I'm willing to teach." Sal knew that if he taught the boy, he would at least insist on the first important rituals for druids. He wouldn't be able to teach the awakening, because there was no way to get through all the rituals for a druid before the boy reached his last maturity, but he would insist on teaching the protections against the negative effects of rituals. The boy, meanwhile, looked at Sal thoughtfully. "How different?" he asked hesitatingly. Sal looked at the boy seriously. "I guess totally different," he said with a sigh. "I wasn't taught like your other healers at all. My oath might have been basically the same." Well, it wasn't, but Sal wasn't willing to explain the difference to the boy. "But my teachings have been very different, and if I teach you, I will only teach you the way I have been taught, and not any other way." The boy frowned, but all in all he looked quite thoughtful. In the end he nodded slowly. "I think," he said slowly, "I will be able to live with the fact that I won't be taught like those who refused me because I can't pay for the apprenticeship." Then the boy's face fell a bit. "What will I have to pay for the apprenticeship?" he asked, a bit of fear in his eyes. Sal just shook his head. "I won't ask you for money," he said tiredly. "I will expect you to work with me and listen to me, but I won't force you to pay for my guidance. I don't need the money, and I don't care if you can afford a normal apprenticeship or not." The answer was a smile, and Sal had to suppress another sigh. It seemed that his mental complaints about missing healers had actually affected him enough that he was willing to train his help himself. "Looks like I'm back to teaching," he thought, exasperated. "And there I thought I was finally rid of that part of my life for a while after I basically fled Hogwarts." 1899? Eloise forced open her eyes. For a moment, her eyes and Sal's met. Then Sal sighed and closed his eyes tiredly. "I warned you," he said sadly the moment he was sure that she was aware of her surroundings. But you didn't want to listen. Again, his eyes searched her. He saw her staring at him, scrutinizing him until she finally was able to place him. Salvatio, she rasped, and he smiled. Actually, he confessed, you first got to know me as Professor Malfoy. Her eyes widened. But yes, you are right, Sal continued. I am Salvatio, the 17-year-old child you met in 1402. But, Eloise rasped out. You should have lived through the centuries like I did, Sal said sadly. It would have been far better for your health if you had done like I suggested. What are you doing here? He finished for her quietly, looking over at Charles, who was raging against the other healers. I'm a healer at St. Mungo's currently, Sal said. I gave up my teaching position some time ago and started anew. Currently, I'm a healer's apprentice. He rolled his eyes at that while remembering that there was no way anybody in this hospital would be able to teach him anything new. Sal had been a healer for millennia. Whatever they taught him, he had actually known for at least a few hundred years already. 160-1702. The Master Healer of London wishes to speak with you. Sal sighed and looked up from his patient. Next to him, Mungo also looked up from his own patient, his face, unlike Sal's, wary of the healer apprentice who had searched them out. And why does Master Avery want to speak with me? Sal asked calmly, not about to freak out over a child who was throwing a temper tantrum, even if said child was the Master Healer of London. Master Avery has not said, the healer apprentice said, but his face showed his disapproval of the house they were in, and that Sal used to treat his patients. Sal for a moment said nothing, but in the end nodded. All right, he said, give me half an hour and I will be willing to meet him. Sal was quite aware that the man might be about to force Sal's compliance to his insane plan of letting London suffer, but Sal wasn't truly concerned about that. In the eyes of magic, Sal was of higher ranking when it came to his oath, his experience and abilities, the measurement of his status. The healer apprentice's face turned sour, but in the end he nodded. If it has to be like that, he said moodily. Sal snorted in amusement, and then turned to Mungo. Make sure that all of them are quarantined in the wards, and then ensure that they're safe from attack or whatever else. I'm going to finish this brew and then help you, he ordered. Mungo nodded instantly. Yes, sir, he said before setting to work. It didn't take long until Sal noticed that at the start, sour-faced apprentice began to take interest in their work, the longer he watched. In the end, the curiosity of the boy won out and he came closer to Sal, who was still finishing up his brew. What exactly is your apprentice doing, master? He asked Sal, interested. I have never seen someone weaving magic like that. For a moment, Sal just looked the other apprentice in the eyes, Sal's mind automatically slipping through the weak defenses of the boy and measuring his worth. In the end, he answered evenly. It's called quarantine, he said. The magical bubbles surrounding our patients ensure that they don't spread the illness further. They keep the patients clean and monitor their health. If the condition of one of them worsens, I will be notified immediately thanks to them. The boy looked at the bubbles of magic with huge eyes. They sound useful, he said, and Sal smiled at the healer apprentice. They are, he said, not elaborating that they were just a version of his normal healing dome that he had used for centuries. The bubbles, unlike the domes, were created especially for illnesses. They didn't have the stasis component his usual wards had, and an added component to keep the one treating the patient safe, but all in all they were quite similar. Where did you learn those, master? The healer apprentice asked longingly, and Sal rolled his eyes. For all the boy's sour-faced demeanor at the start of their interaction, the boy truly had the heart of a healer. Sal was sure that if the child got the chance, he would make an excellent healer one day, exactly like his apprentice of a year, one Mungo Bonham. They're a variation of the rituals I learned for healing, Sal replied. My mother taught me like she was taught by her forebearers. The boy's face fell a bit. So there's no way for you to teach me, is there? He asked, a bit disheartened, and Sal wondered when he had turned into a potential teacher in the other apprentice's eyes. Not without you learning the rituals of protection first, Sal replied kindly. Even my own apprentice isn't allowed to cast those yet, and he has been apprenticed to me for a year now. The other apprentice frowned. My parents already paid the tuition to Master Avery to take me in as an apprentice, he said, frowning. I haven't learned a lot from him yet, since it has only been a few weeks, but I don't think he would be willing for me to take out time of my schedule just to learn from another healer. Saul snorted. From what he had heard about Master Avery within the last year, the man was stuck up and quite arrogant, and absolutely fixated on the monetary aspect of his life. Sal couldn't stand him, and he hadn't even met the man yet. I fear I can't see him accepting your proposition as well, Sal I finally settled on saying before removing the cauldron from the flames and starting to bottle the still-hot potion. After he was done, he moved on to help his apprentice before finally setting the last wards that would give an intruder quite a hard time entering, if he ever managed to enter, that is, and then nodded to the other healer apprentice that they were ready to go. The house they were led to was more like a manor than a house. The entrance hall was adorned with expensive carpets and tapestries. Golden candelabras adorned the ceiling, and the windows were made of colored glass, as if glass for windows. That huge wasn't expensive enough already. The Master Healer of London was living like a king, and Sal's antipathy grew a bit more. He absolutely abhorred people who were solely interested in themselves. That the man was a healer and should have been bound by the oath to help, yet somehow had managed to not lift a finger, was just irking Sal some more. The healer apprentice led them to the man's study, knocked and then opened the door carefully. "The healer and his apprentice are here, sir," he said. A moment later he opened the door and Sal had his first look at the other man. The man was fat, with mousy grey hair and a long beard that reminded Sal of the legends about his second-born son Merlin. The man's face, on the other hand, wasn't at all as kind as Muradin's was described. Instead, it was even sourer than the healer apprentices had been when he had come to Sal. "Enter," he said, and his beady eyes settled on Sal and Mungo the moment they stepped into the room. The moment his gaze landed on Mungo, the boy began to squirm. Sal instead returned the gaze, his own eyes lit with hidden fire. "You wanted to see us, Healer Avery?" Sal asked coolly. He knew that the right conduct would have been to call the man Master Avery, but Sal didn't even need to read the other man's thoughts to know that the man had called them into his domain to stomp down on their independence. Sal wasn't willing to even verbally acknowledge anything that could be taken as deferring to the other man's imagined superiority. The other healer frowned at him. "It's Master Avery, healer," he corrected Sal rudely. "I am the Master Healer of London. Didn't my apprentice tell you that?" Sal just returned the unhappy gaze of the other man. "He might have mentioned something like that," he replied sweetly instead. The other man's face darkened. "If he mentioned it, you should be aware that I'm the most experienced healer here in London, and therefore should be treated with respect." Sal looked at his own apprentice, and then towards the door where the other apprentice was still standing, while shuffling nervously from one foot to the other. "Considering that the only other healers in London that I met seemed to be healer apprentices, I don't think that being the master healer is such an accomplishment," he replied evenly. The other healer's gaze darkened further. "Do not dare to mock me, healer," he exclaimed, nearly hissing at Sal. "I called you here to ensure your obedience. You will cease from disobeying me and follow my will like any other healer here in London. Not one healer will treat Mugdanes and those too weak in magic to fight against a common Mugdanes." It took a moment for Sal to understand that Mug people were actually mundanes, non-magicals. In that moment he could feel the other man's oath reaching out to Sal to force him into obedience, just to shatter and withdraw the moment it touched Sal's own oath. Sal could feel the same oath reaching out to Mungo as well, but, since Mungo wasn't yet oath-bound as a healer, but oath-bound as an apprentice to Sal, the oath had as much effect on the apprentice as on the master. Sal's gazes cooled a lot more after feeling the other man trying to use the oath as a way to bind Sal to his demands. Normally the oath between the healers was a good thing, but like everything it could be abused as well if someone found a way like the man in front of him had. From the man's sureness of his actions and considering his name, Sal guessed that the Master Healer of London was also part of the Wizards' Council, and therefore felt untouchable. For a moment, Sal considered eradicating the other healer here and now, but then he simply inclined his head to the man and turned around to leave the room. Mungo, confusion on his face, followed. The other apprentice followed as well, his shoulders slumped and defeated. Sal led the way out of the premises and walked another 2 streets before stopping and turning to the 2 apprentices, a bit amused that the other boy had followed him as well. "Sir," Mungo spoke up immediately, confusion still prominent on his face. "Why didn't you say anything minor?" "Because sometimes you can't take the open fight," Sol said earnestly. "If I had objected him right then and there, he would have had every power to destroy us in that moment. We were on his property, under wards following his command. He could have had us killed or imprisoned the very moment I would have continued to object." That made the other apprentice look up open-mouthed. "You could have objected him further?" he asked in disbelief. Sal inclined his head. "His oath has no power over me," he said, "and since Mungo is sworn to me, it has no power over him as well. I could have objected, but we were in enemy territory, so I choose not to." The boy looked at Sol in surprise. "How?" he asked. It was Mungo who answered. "It's part of the healer's oath," he said. "Those with more experience are those with the power over other healers. As an apprentice, you are the one with lesser experience. But Master Sal is older than he looks and he has a lot more experience in healing as Master Avery. If Master Sal wanted to, he could take over as the Master Healer of London." Sal rolled his eyes, but he guessed that Mungo was right. If he wanted to, he could take over. It just wasn't a good idea to challenge that man in his own territory. Sal said, sighing. "That's why I just left." "So, what are you going to do now?" the young apprentice asked. Mungo looked at Sal as well. Sal shrugged. "I'll continue with what I was doing," he replied. "What else should I do? The plague is still killing the people of London. I have no time to get in a political battle, and no reason to stop treating the ill." Mungo grinned. "Sounds good," he said. The other healer, on the other hand, looked quite wistful. "I wish there was a way for me to take up an apprenticeship with you instead of having to continue the one with Master Avery," he said. Sal shrugged. "Changing masters is quite easy," he said, "especially since I'm the higher-ranking healer. If you were to swear your apprentice oath to me as you have done to Master Avery, the one of Master Avery would automatically count it as void, since I am the more experienced teacher." The other healer apprentice shrugged. "Be as it may," he said. "My parents paid Master Avery. They won't afford me another apprenticeship just because I want to change my master." The next moment, pleading eyes settled on Sal. Sal sighed and rolled his eyes at Mungo, who was currently trying his puppy dog eyes on Sal. "You will be the one helping me to teach him," Sal told the other boy. Mungo grinned. The other apprentice looked a bit confused at Sal and then at Mungo. "What? Minus?" Before he could speak his mind, Mungo already intercepted him. "What's your name and how old are you?" he asked the apprentice. Elamirus Gaunt, and I'm 18, the boy replied, still quite confused. "Well, Elamirus," Sal said, and held out his hand. "If you wish to, I will welcome you as my apprentice." The boy smiled and took Sal's hand. If Sal had known that accepting Elamirus would just be the beginning, he would have thought about it twice. A month after Elamirus took up his apprenticeship under Sal's tutelage, on the 2nd September, the Great Fire of London started at the bakery of Thomas Ferrinor on Pudding Lane, shortly after midnight, and spread rapidly west across the city of London. Sal took his apprentices and fled to the Potters, where he was welcomed by Ralston's grandson. When the fire finally ceased its destruction on Wednesday, Sal had gained another apprentice and the support of the Potters, Princes, Longbottoms and Prewetts. In the aftermath of the fire, Mungo insisted on adding a hidden building to the mundane world, the future magical hospital. They opened the doors about a year later with Sal as the lead healer and his by then 6 apprentices as his helpers. When the Master Healer of London objected and complained to the Wizards' Council, his wish was swatted away by their new political allies and Sal himself. 2 years later, Mungo finished his training and swore his oath. At that time, the Master Healer of London had lost nearly all support and all but 2 apprentices. When he tried to force the newly named healer Mungo under his control, Mungo rebelled. His rebellion ended with Master Healer Avery's oath going against the Master Healer himself when he tried to hurt the young healer. It wasn't a pretty sight. The other healers were in awe for Mungo's daring. "Well, Saint Mungo," Sal joked when the young healer returned to their hospital, "I heard you swatted the evil Master Healer of London for the last time." Mungo laughed. Then he swallowed harshly. It was terrible to watch, he confessed tiredly to his master. I don't think I will ever forget that ever again. Sal just nodded and clasped the young man's shoulder. At least you can be sure that you will never try to follow his path, he pointed out seriously, the smile suddenly gone. But in the end I fear it was for the best. I'm still surprised how he managed to not have negative effects thanks to the oath before that. He didn't swear the full oath, Mungo said bitterly. That's what he confessed. We will have to make sure that every healer's oath is monitored when sworn. Like that we will know if something's wrong. It would be for the best, Sal agreed with a sigh. A bit more than 200 years later, Sal would, thanks to that agreement, find out that swearing a healer's oath over a guardian healer's oath did just one thing: give the person trying to do it a headache. It seemed that the moment you were a guardian healer, you would always be a guardian healer. There was no way to change your oath to that of a normal healer, even if you were basically forced to swear that oath. So we continue on as normal now? Mungo asked Sal. Sal rolled his eyes. No, he replied, and when Mungo looked at him in surprise, Sal added, annoyed, I definitely won't continue to train all those so-called apprentices by myself. Do you know how tiring it is to look after so many people? A master should only have 1 to 3 apprentices, not 3 dozen. The answer was a laugh from Mungo. At least London will not lack healers after they're all trained, he reasoned, amused. Barely 50 years later, Mungo and his hospital was well known all over the Isles. Every graduate from his hospital wore green robes with a wand crossed with a bone as an emblem, something that hadn't been there ever before. Mungo's hospital also had not only gained a reputation but also a name as well, St. Mungo's Hospital for Magical Maladies and Injuries. Sal had groaned when hearing it the first time. Mungo, on the other hand, had laughed. It's all your fault, Master Sal, he said. You shouldn't have called me St. Mungo where every apprentice could hear you back then. Sal guessed the other man was right, but then, hindsight. 1899, when Sal returned from his memories, he smiled at Eloise, who was looking confused at his face. She clearly couldn't understand his exasperation with the fact that he had to play the healer apprentice in St. Mungo's in this time and place. Sadly, there's no way I can tell them that I've been a healer for far longer than they've been alive already, so I had to start anew, he added to clarify for her, amused by his problems instead of annoyed. Then his face turned serious again. If you want to, I can stop the pain, he told her, his eyes grave and sympathetic. The aging, Eloise forced out, and Sal shook his head. I'm sorry, he said. There are even things I can't do. I'm no god, you know. For a moment he could feel the sorrow welling up inside him, then the wind caressed his hair, and he was reminded of the fact that sometimes there was no way for him to change somebody's future, especially when it came to Eloise, who had been the one to step on the path that led her there. It's not your responsibility, the wind reminded him. You did all you could. And yet Sal resented the fact that the only thing he could do was to stand by and watch. This was your choice, he said bitterly. I researched your predicament since you left Back to the Future. I found no way to stop the moment you destroyed the timeline's pathway with your decision to return to a place that didn't exist already. I am sorry, so sorry that I'm unable to do more for you. He meant it. As much as he knew it wasn't his fault, he still truly meant it. No, Eloise rasped out, I am for not listening. She wasn't the first who hadn't listened to Sal, and she wouldn't be the last. In Sal's eyes, she was just one out of many who had never taken the time to actually listen to what he said. A lot of things would have been easier if other people would have just listened, but then Sal had long since gotten used to stepping in on his own because other people were turning a blind eye on the happenings of the world. 1826. Sometimes Salvus Sahar Emrys Lefay hated his life. He was millennia old, and yet, when the Ministry of Magic started to exist in Britain and the Wizards' Council was changed to the Wizengamot, Sal had to be outside of Britain. Well, it wouldn't have been that bad if not for the fact that now magical travel and other magic could be monitored and would be monitored if the person wasn't registered as a citizen of the Isles. Of course, with Sal being from the future and in Asia when he would have had the chance to register, he was now in a small predicament. Either I don't set foot on the Isles until I'm born, which means I'll have to tour Europe for the next 100-something years, or I'll find a way to register without being treated like a criminal and locked away in Azkaban. Sal mused, a bit more amused by his predicament than annoyed, but then, he was millennia old and living without problems was never that interesting. At least this problem was something new. But what could he do? I don't actually fancy playing a baby and child all over again, he thought, a bit exasperated. Especially since I don't have any family who could claim me, which would just end up with me being even more suspicious as I already am for the new government. Sal wasn't too sure if calling a government new after it existed for over 100 years was really the right thing to do, but then compared to the length of time the Wizards' Council and the Gathering of the Lords had existed, the Ministry of Magic with its Wizengamot definitely still counted as new. Well, Sal mused, if I'd be sure that one of the Potters I knew was still alive, I'd ask them if I could play child or relative to them, but since I don't know and there's no way but actually step on British soil to find out, what can I do? Of course, normally it wouldn't have bothered Sol if he could or couldn't step onto Britain for the next 100 years. He had been away far longer in the past, after all, but this time around there was a very important reason why he actually needed to return to Britain. At that point of time, Sal was in France, staying with his oncle and tante. It had been Nicholas Flamel who heard the rumors while he was out to buy potion ingredients and told him that there was a new Dark Lord in Britain who was dead set on destroying Hogwarts. I could tell them you're my nephew and went to Beauxbaton, Nicholas suggested in that moment. It wouldn't even be lying, well, except the Beauxbaton part. It wouldn't, Sal said with a sigh. But it also wouldn't stand up to any inquiry. I have no time to actually attend Beauxbatons, and even you aren't able to get them to forge their records. So one inquiry and it will be all in the open that I'm not the person I pretend to be. Nicholas raised an eyebrow. But if you go to Britain as Salvatio Malfoy, you are the person you pretend to be, he pointed out. Salvatio Malfoy officially vanished without a trace hundreds of years ago, Sal replied, looking at his uncle pointedly. It would be odd for him to resurface now, looking younger than he did the last time people saw him. The other man sighed. I guess I forgot that little fact, he said, sounding a bit annoyed at having to be reminded. Sal snickered. Getting a little old there, uncle? He teased, and his uncle rolled his eyes. Hush you, he said, sounding as amused as Sal. Then his face turned thoughtful. How do you like the idea of me contacting the current Lord Potter? While we normally don't talk too much, ever since you dragging both of our families into the eradication of the Slytherin family, we at least write the Potters' Yule cards every year. Sal rolled his eyes. Figures, he muttered. Yule cards. Nicholas shrugged. It's too much of a hassle to remember the birthdays of the current living Potters and not get them mixed up with the ones of the past, so your Tante Perenelle and I settled on Yule cards. Sal decided not to comment on the fact that Nicholas and Perenelle weren't forced at all to keep contact with the other family. Anyway, his uncle continued, I can write Lord Potter and tell him about your predicament. If he accepts, we just make sure that the goblins add you to the Lord's family tree somehow, and voila, one new identity for you. Sal snorted. You know that this doesn't change the fact that I'll not be registered in Britain, and that I won't have any schooling records or whatever, he pointed out, half amused and half annoyed. Nicholas frowned at him. Aren't you able to adjust your age, he asked interestedly. I mean, I saw you do it and I know that it wasn't a glamour but a true adjustment, or at least as true as a false age can be. Sal sighed. After his uncle and aunt had gained immortality thanks to the Philosopher's Stone, they had of course started to find out bits and pieces about Sal's true self. He had never bothered hiding from them, so his ability to age and de-age was known to them to a certain extent. Sal had never bothered to tell them that if he wanted to, he could basically change himself to every age, from baby to old man. Not that Sal had ever deliberately taken the form of a baby either. He preferred to be able to take care of himself. Thank you very much. Or is this 20-something-year-old body the youngest you can manage? His uncle added while gesturing at Sal's body, which was looking like Sal's preferred age range again. Sal sighed. No, he said, not totally happy about having to confess that. I can turn younger if I want to. He just never truly wanted to, especially since things normally decided to go pear-shaped the moment Sal decided on an age below 20. Well, then we'll make sure that you're just old enough to go to Hogwarts after we explain everything to the Lord Potter, and then smuggle you into Hogwarts as a student so that you can defend it from that vicious Lord Morgan, or whatever he calls himself, Nicholas said, smirking. Sal just raised an eyebrow. You know that it's the parents who register the children at birth and not Hogwarts, he pointed out unhappily. Even mundane-born are registered the moment they have their first bout of accidental magic, which is way before Hogwarts. Nicholas waved it off. We just say that you were born in France and that your parents obviously forgot to register you, he said, then his face turned pensive. I believe that the current Lord Potter even had a younger sister who went missing about 9 years ago. It should be easy to introduce you as her child. Sal grimaced. That doesn't change the fact that I don't actually want to play a child. You know, he pointed out unhappily. Nicholas snorted. It's not as if you're truly forced to play a child, he said. The Lord Potter will know your actual age and your reasons for going to Hogwarts. But the people in Hogwarts won't, Sal pointed out with an eye roll. This stopped his uncle in his tracks. Yeah, they won't, he conceded, but you said it yourself. There's a Dark Lord out there who wants to attack Hogwarts. You are the one with the best connection to the wards, the one who can manipulate the wards as you have shown before. If that means to play a child so that you are part of Hogwarts, so be it. If I could go as a teacher, that Morrigan, whatever dude would try to take you out first, like he will try with every other teacher he will encounter the moment he enters Hogwarts. As a student, you won't be very high on the hit list of that dark wizard or at all. Sal groaned. In other words, you want me to go to Hogwarts disguised as a student, Sal sighed. He just sighed again when his uncle grinned mischievously. Sometimes he wondered if his uncle would have turned out as mischievous as he had if he had not lived as long as he had. In the end, he just rolled his eyes. Figures that you want to see me suffer, he declared, not truly exasperated. His uncle smiled. It's my duty to make you suffer as your uncle, Nicholas pointed out, and now stop with your objections. I'll contact Lord Potter and make sure that he knows everything. Sal sighed and shook his head. You can't, he said tiredly. He'll be held accountable if I'm posing as his unregistered nephew, and you and I know that it will come out the moment I use my magic for the first time. Nicholas frowned. But posing as a child would be the best way to get you into Hogwarts, he pointed out. And you need relations. That stopped Sal in his tracks. Did he truly need relations? He wasn't too sure what kind of magical innovations had reached Britain in this century, but he was quite sure that whatever it was, he would be able to circumvent a lot of the repercussions if he truly appeared on the Isles as a child. Maybe, he said slowly, I truly should simply appear in Britain. His uncle looked at him frowning. I'm not too sure if that's a good idea, Salvatio, he said slowly. The Ministry won't take it lightly if there's suddenly and unexplainably a foreign wizard in their midst. Sal inclined his head. You're right, he told his uncle, but I'm sure that I can twist the whole thing so that they don't throw me into Azkaban, even if I have to tell them that I've been living for centuries already. You know that being centuries old won't bring you into Hogwarts, his uncle pointed out. Sal groaned. He couldn't fault his uncle for that reasoning. So I need another explanation, he concluded. If you want to get into Hogwarts with that ruse to ensure that that moron of a wizard is definitely stopped by the wards, Nicholas said, shrugging. Sal pinched his nose. His uncle was right. Sal needed to get into Hogwarts somehow, and to get there he needed to be a child. Sal grimaced at that thought. He definitely didn't want to play child, but he guessed that there was no way around it. As a child, he at least wouldn't be prosecuted too much when they caught him. Maybe I should just change to my original age of 15, Sal thought, frowning. But at 15 he would have learned enough magic that the current dark wizard would keep an eye on him if the man truly somehow managed to invade Hogwarts. Younger then, Sal grimaced again. Best would be 11 and coming in as a new student. At least as a new student he wouldn't stand out. And not standing out would be one of the most important parts if he intended to shield Hogwarts from the current threat without anybody any wiser about it. But how could he enter Hogwarts as a child without any records of his existence? Sometimes I wish I would simply use my knowledge and time travel, Sal thought, exasperated. It would be so easy to insert myself into another life if I just started out as a baby. Not that Sal wanted to live as a baby, and even as a baby, he would have the problem of not having parents, and it was then that Sal found a solution he hadn't thought about before. Time travel, he whispered. Nicholas frowned in confusion at Sal. What do you mean with time travel? He asked, puzzled. Sal looked at his uncle. Exactly what I said, uncle, he said. It would explain everything. I'm not registered as a time traveler. I don't have any records as a time traveler, and if I'm a child, there's no way that my time travel was actually planned. Nicholas raised an eyebrow. How by Merlin and Morgana did you come up with time travel? He asked, bemused. Sal shrugged, looking a bit sheepishly at his uncle. Because it isn't a lie, Sal said, something that might be a good idea considering that there had been some different truth serum invented over the last 2 centuries. Nicholas's eyebrow shot even higher. Time travel isn't a lie? He repeated and stared at Salvatio. What? Sal sighed and closed his eyes. I wasn't born in the past, Sal finally said, looking away from his uncle. He knew that it would be a shock to his uncle, but then maybe it was time that he finally told somebody else, except of Mirrodin, where he actually came from. Nicholas frowned. What do you... Sal took a deep breath, but in the end answered the half-asked question. Sometime in the future one of your descendants will marry into the Potter family, he said while closing his eyes. I can't tell you too much, but it ends with me being born the descendant of Lefeyan Potter, a phoenix-born child. His uncle's eyes widened. Are you telling me you time-traveled? He asked in disbelief. Sal inclined his head. I did, he said, and I've been living in the past ever since. Nicholas sighed and closed his eyes as well. Eloise, he said slowly, you knew the language she was speaking because you were raised with that version of our language. Sal shook his head. Not with the same version of our language, he corrected, but with a quite similar one. Nicholas nodded. I guess I should have seen that, he said while shaking his head. At least after the language incident, if not way before that. There's no way you should have understood that woman, and yet you did. I should have seen it for what it was and not thought about it as some obscure ability of a phoenix. Sal laughed, but in the end shook his head. Time travel isn't that common that people would think about it first, he said, amused. I don't think that you or Perenelle could have figured it out back then. After all, Peverell knew me far longer, and yet had no idea that this little secret even existed. Nicholas looked at Sal in surprise. This sounds as if nobody knew about it, he said. Sal shrugged. Atra knew, he replied, but he was the only one. Nicholas furrowed his eyebrows. Atra. He tried to repeat the word. Who's that? Atra, Sal corrected. And it doesn't matter. He was long since dead way before I was reborn as your nephew. Nicholas frowned, but in the end he dropped the matter. So you want to go to Britain and tell them you're a time traveler? He asked, looking at Sal a bit concerned. Don't you think that they might try an experiment on you or something like that when they find out? Sal snorted. I won't go there and tell them I time traveled, he said, amused. I will simply go there and do what I have to do. If they notice me, and I'm sure they will, I will use whatever I can to stay out of prison. If that means to tell them that I time traveled, so be it. If they want to imprison me anyway, or try to control me, I will force them to let me go. I have some leeway in Britain, you know. Nicholas frowned. Leeway? Sal shrugged. You're my uncle and paterfamilias. If you don't hear anything from me within the next week, you will simply have to go to the Wizengamot and force them to release me. If they won't listen, I'll get myself out of whatever they want to do with me within the next month. Don't worry about that. If Sal needed to, he would use his power as the Lord of the Land, the magical Prince of Britain, to force the others to comply with his wishes. Salvatio! Don't worry, Uncle Nick, Sal said reassuringly. I know what I can or can't do. For a moment his uncle hesitated, but in the end he sighed. All right, he said, but I will write Lord Potter and tell him to look out for my nephew. Sal rolled his eyes but nodded. If you wish to, He gave in and his uncle smiled. "That's what I do," he replied. 3 days later, on the 31st July, Sal entered Britain looking like an 11-year-old child. He had planned to look around in Diagon Alley before being found out as an intruder. He definitely hadn't planned on stumbling upon an attack of Lord Morgan's men. The men were attacking other people in the alley, downing them with curses and laughing at the panicking people. Sal wanted to groan. He had wanted to take a look at the alley and the changes, not start his day with confronting Lord Morgan's men. Yet it seemed like that was what he would do, since the most of the other wizards and witches in the alley didn't even think about fighting back. Without bothering to draw his wand, he decided to at least try and act as if he was too young for a wand. He drew some runes in the air and threw them at some children, and who were trapped between some people who actually fought back, and some of Lord Morgan's men. It was a simplified rune sequence Sal had perfected over the centuries, there to shield and normally used by Sal as a shield between exploding cauldron and student. This time around, the shield stopped the curses that would have hit the children just seconds later. Sal saw the surprise and confusion of Morgan's men when their targets weren't actually hit. But before Sal could think about using their distracting to down them, somebody else had already enacted that plan. One after another, 3 men of Morgan dropped to the ground, hit by various curses, thanks to the quick wand of a man with silver eyes. Sal had never seen that man before, but the form of his face and the color of his eyes told him everything he needed to know. The other man was an Ollivander. Only that family had those eerie silvery eyes, not dreamy like the ones of the Lovegoods, but absolutely penetrating and eerie. It was surprising that the current Ollivander had decided to take action. Not because of his abilities to fight, since the Ollivander family had always been good at fighting, but because of the fact that normally the Ollivanders didn't choose a side. They were far too valuable as wand makers to enter into battle. As if Sal's thought had brought forth bad luck, 10 of Morgan's men turned on the wand maker. Regretfully, Ollivander was anything but an easy opponent, so when he was finally downed, he had already taken 5 of his opponents with him. Sal saw the man going down, hit by a spell that had hit him against the head, and sent out one of his runes just in time to shield Ollivander from the rest of the enemy's spells. They all thankfully splashed harmlessly against the shield. After Sal had made sure that his other shields surrounding the children still stood strong, he weaved through the panicking and fighting crowd to the wand maker and entered his rune shield to take a look at the man's injuries. The runes Sal used to find out the other man's injuries clearly indicated that the spell had broken the bones in Ollivander's head, not such an easy fix. Sal could just hope that the brain hadn't been hurt as well, since even with magic, healing the brain was basically impossible. Sal also knew that the injury could kill the wand maker if it wasn't stabilized at once, not a good thing considering that they were in the middle of a battlefield and a bunch of children were depending on Sal to shield them. He might have been situated in one of the areas he could use magic a lot better than elsewhere, but that didn't change the fact that he had to basically keep an eye on 3 things: the shield of the children, the healing and the battle itself, and Sal wasn't too sure if he could manage that. Well, no time but now to find out, Sal thought sarcastically, and then started with his work to stabilize the gravely injured man in front of him. He pulled out his staff to draw the stasis runes, and then sat it down beside him while he ensured that the brain wasn't damaged and the swelling of the brain would recede. He was a bit surprised when barely 3 minutes after he started to treat the man, said man opened his eyes to look at Sal, unfocusedly. "You should sleep," he told the man, and checked on the runes that shielded the children. The wand maker's fingers twitched and touched Sal's staff. The man's eyes widened. "Go back to sleep," Sal urged. Unfocused eyes locked onto his own, then the man's eyes closed, and he drifted off again. Sal sighed and finished stabilizing the head injury of Ollivander before moving on to the next hurt person on the ground, either an innocent bystander or one of the defenders. Sal was quite happy when barely 2 minutes later the auras turned up. He continued to hold the shields for another 10 minutes until Morgan's men were either caught or had fled, and then dropped them. Instead of them, he started to concentrate on healing or stabilizing the defenders who had fought with Morgan's men. Ollivander, while still out of it, was already recovering, and Sal guessed that with a potion or two, Sal didn't have those with him, he would be right as rain in another hour or two, so Sal had moved on to other defenders who had been hurt by spells as well. All was well now, or so he thought, until he suddenly was at one point by an aura. He raised his eyes without stopping to apply pressure on the arm wound of his current patient. The aura stared at him coolly. "Who are you?" he asked Sal, "and where are you from?" Sal blinked. He was surprised how rough the aura spoke with him, considering that Sal was in the form of an 11-year-old. "I am Salvatio Malfoy," he answered sincerely. "I am from Britain." The answer was a sneer. "Try again, stranger." Definitely extremely rough considering whom he was talking to, and even if he wasn't talking to a child, why didn't he believe Sal? Of course, Sal wasn't registered, but they didn't have a way to track that immediately, did they? Confusion showed on Sal's face. "I told you the truth," he answered finally, unsure of the reason that showed him to be a liar. "The signature of your magic is not registered with the ministry," the aura sneered. "If you truly are from Britain, then either you broke the law by not registering or you are lying and you aren't from Britain. Either way, you will have to accompany us to the ministry." Sal groaned inwardly. So they had found a way to tell if you were registered or not, even if hundreds of other magicals were surrounding you. Nevertheless, there was no way Sal would go with the other man immediately. He had an oath to keep right now. "Forgive me, sir," he said softly. "I will accompany you as soon as I have helped those people here." The aura just sneered. "It wasn't a suggestion, boy," he said. Sal stared at the aura for a moment, then he simply tipped against his chest and drew out his healer's oath. "If you don't want to be responsible for the loss of my magic, you will let me do my work before I am brought to the ministry," he said softly, hoping to shock the aura and also to guilt-trip him. After all, Sal was a child, and to be responsible for the loss of a child's magic should be something that stopped the even most eager aura. The aura stared at his healer's oath. He gawked and then he gulped. "Then treat them, but if you dare to run, you won't like what'll happen to you." "I won't run," Sal answered sincerely. Of course he had hoped to have some more time before being confronted about his missing registry, but then being found while healing definitely wasn't the worst first impression he could have made. Still, it wouldn't do any good if he was brought to Azkaban for something he had no control over, and not being registered, as Sal had found out earlier that day, was indeed punished with 6 months in Azkaban. But then, he was currently an 11-year-old. Would they truly throw a child into Azkaban? It took another 20 minutes until he was ready. The most of the people now were either healed or at St. Mungo's. Both of it counted as safe so that Sal wasn't needed anymore. So he searched out the aura. "I am ready," he said. The aura and his partner gawked at him. "You truly had no intention to run, did you, boy?" the aura finally said. Sal just shrugged. "I told you I wouldn't run," he answered. "I don't lie if I don't have to. I just play with the truth." But that was something the auras definitely didn't need to know. The aura just raised an eyebrow and then held out his arm. "I will apparate you to the ministry," he said. Sal hid a grimace and just nodded before taking the arm. He had no trouble apparating himself, but the moment he was apparated side along, well, let's just say Sal hoped the aura was good at conjuring buckets in milliseconds. They apparated. The feeling was as sickening as side along always was for Sal. He couldn't stop himself. The moment they landed, he turned away from the aura and emptied his stomach on the floor. The aura definitely hadn't been fast enough with conjuring buckets. A soft hand touched his back. "Child?" This time the aura's voice was soft, as if he suddenly recognized that Sal couldn't be very old, and Sal thought that maybe sometimes it was an advantage to have troubles with being apparated side along. "Forgive me," Sal whispered, still feeling weak from the apparation. It always left behind the feelings of nausea and unsteadiness for him. Basically, he still saw double, and his legs were jelly. "Did you never apparate before with someone else?" the aura asked. Of course, Sal had, but that had ended as well as this time. Sal's Uncle Nick had turned into a master of transfiguration since apparition had started to be common, and he had taken Sal's side along for the first time. Of course, there was no way that Sal would tell the other man something like that, so Sal shook his head and again he felt like retching again. Oh, how he hated sidelong apparition. The aura sighed and vanished the sick. "Sit down and put your head between your knees until you feel better," he said softly. Sal followed his advice instantly. Oh, he hadn't felt as sick as in that moment for at least 100 years. But then Sal's muddled brain mused. It had been about 100 years ago when Nicholas last had taken him sidelong, so it shouldn't surprise him that it was that long ago that he felt that sick. The aura sighed next to him. "I am sorry, child," he said. "I should have brought you to your parents and should have accused your parents for the lack of your registration, and not you." Sal took some gulps of air until he felt sure that he could speak again. Then he said, "V no parents." "Excuse me, I have no parents," Sal repeated, and slowly dared to look up. Yes, he felt better again, not that it changed anything about his hatred for sidelong apparition. He still stayed on the floor for another few seconds, but then he stood up slowly. "What do you mean, you've no parents?" the Auror asked, now sounding more concerned than angry. Obviously being sick thanks to apparition was a child's trait in the Auror's eyes. Sal wondered if it was just a belief of the other man or if it truly was a child's trait, and Sal was stuck with it thanks to his body actually still being 15. Maybe the nausea existed because of the not yet fully matured magic in a child. Sal guessed that that was something to ponder later on and instead shrugged as an answer to the Aura's question. "I'm an orphan," he answered sincerely. For the third time, that thought somehow hurt. The Aura sighed, but his face had softened, and Sal was sure that if he had taken a peek with legilimency into the other man's mind, Sal would have seen himself going from potential threat to maybe just a child. "Let's get you to our interrogation room," the Auror finally said softly. "Will I go to Azkaban?" Sal figured that if he had to look like a child, he at least could act like one as well, for now, and the question truly interested him. Would they send an unregistered child to Azkaban as well? A calloused hand softly touched his hair. "We will have to interrogate you, child," the Auror said. "But if you truly are a child, we definitely won't chuck you into Azkaban." Good to know that Sal didn't have to take over the Ministry for Unreasonable Laws as well. It definitely was bad enough that he had to infiltrate Hogwarts to shield it from Lord Morgan. Still, the Aura's words not only brought relief, but questions as well. "If I truly am a child?" Sal asked, surprised. "Polyjuice potion," the man said, and when Sal forced himself to look at the man quizzically, he elaborated. "A potion to change you into another person, if you take it. If I was a foreign wizard and here to do harm, I'd use polyjuice to look like a child, just in the hope that no one would look at a foreign child." So polyjuice potion was finally invented. Sal wondered if truly someone would go so far and use the potion to change into a child just to infiltrate a country. A second later, Sal wanted to roll his eyes at himself. Of course there were people out there who would consider it. After all, Sal had also changed into a child, so that he wasn't suspicious to the people. Maybe if there truly was polyjuice potion available now, the precaution the Aura had taken with Sal was understandable if not reasonable. "Oh," he said, and decided that he definitely needed to find out what kind of new things in magic theory and practice had reached Britain in the last 100 years. Well, he had to find out as soon as he was able to get away from here. Wasn't he lucky that he had ended up in the Ministry before he had been able to gather the intel as planned? Sal sighed and reminded himself that silent sarcasm wouldn't help him right now. He would have to wing it without the data he had wanted to get before ending up in the clutches of the Ministry. He followed the Aura to an interrogation room. The room was dimly lit and small. There was a simple table in the middle and a chair on each side. In a corner a cloaked man stood and looked at them when they entered. His cloak was grey and his face was hidden by artificial shadows. Sal looked at him with interest. "An unspeakable," the Aura said, explaining. "He's here in case you truly are a spy from another country." Sal remembered the founding of the Unspeakables back when he had worked with Ralston to ensure the safety of the magical world. They were researchers, but also the contingency plan Sal and Ralston had developed after the Slytherin family had been killed off. They had started to exist to try and stop the slaughter of whole families just because they stepped onto somebody's toes. The Unspeakables were there to gather intel and warn people if something dangerous stirred in their midst. Sal gulped at those thoughts, but then told himself that he definitely wasn't a spy, and therefore should be safe. He just had to work out how to placate the auror and the unspeakable somehow. "What will happen now?" he asked hesitatingly. The aura smiled, and Sal guessed that he was right, and the doubt of the aura had somehow lessened since Sal's reaction to the apparition. "We'll give you a potion so that you have to tell the truth, and then we will interrogate you," the aura answered. Sal nodded and sat down in the chair when the aura pointed at it. He watched the man pulling out a potion and some parchment and a quill. The parchment was put down on the table, and the quill was sat on the tip on top of it. Sal looked at it in surprise. That was something he hadn't seen before, even in the rest of Europe. The next moment he found that his curiosity had won, and he examined the parchment and quill with his eyes. "What does it do?" he asked, interested, and watched with unintentionally huge and innocent-looking eyes the quill writing down his question. The aura laughed at his surprised gaze that made Sal's currently young body look even younger than it was. "Obviously it documents the interrogation," he said, and the quill wrote down his words. "Oh. Well, let's continue," the auror said. "Auror Regulus Pollux Black interrogating Salvatio Malfoy for missing registration with the Ministry, as Salvatio Malfoy apparently is a child. Instead of Veritaserum, a children-friendly truth serum is administered." "But what if I'm polyjuiced?" Sal asked, concerned and intrigued with this new puzzle. He knew about Veritaserum and the fact that it shouldn't be given to a child until the child in question was at least 14 and therefore definitely in puberty. To younger children, Veritaserum would more or less often enough act like poison, and killing children just to get the truth was normally seen as unacceptable for most people. But how would polyjuice play into the whole age trouble with Veritaserum? You have the body of a child at the moment, so it doesn't matter if you are polyjuiced or not. Your body can't take Veritaserum at the moment, and the child-friendly truth serum will affect you like it would every child, Aura Black explained patiently. "Oh," Sal said, and wondered if somebody had to die to get this piece of knowledge. Then the unspeakable stepped forward to Sal. "Open your mouth." Sal did as he was told, and felt the truth serum being administered. The seconds ticked by, and a hazy feeling started to envelop Salvazahar. Sal inwardly mused what the truth serum would make him spill. After all, he had lived for a long time and had been named not just once. What did count by a truth serum, and what didn't? "What is your name, child?" the aura started. Sal felt the potion compelling him to tell the truth, but it didn't compel him to say a specific name. It seemed that Salvatio Malfoy was as true for the truth serum as Salvazar Emrys, Salazar Slytherin, or Harry Potter. Well, Sal had already given a name, so he decided to stay with the name he had told them before, even if it somehow had been mangled by the aura. "Salvatio Amethyst Malfoy," he said. This time the aura smiled, his doubt obviously retreating further. "How old are you?" he asked. "Interesting question." 15 and 11, Sal's mouth answered. Sal blinked at the answer. He wasn't sure if he should be surprised that both ages of his body counted or not. He also didn't know if he should feel relieved that he didn't know the millennia he lived as well or not. He was quite sure that if he had known them, he would have been able to choose between the answers of his body age and his mental age as well. Still, why did the damn serum make him name both ages of his body? Wasn't one of them enough, preferably the younger one? The auror raised an eyebrow when he heard Sal's answer. "Are you 15 or 11?" he asked. This time there was no answer to choose from for Sal. "Both," Sal said. The auror blinked. How is it possible to be both? The question was a good one. Regrettably, Sal had long since accepted that it simply was like that for him, so the only answer he could give was, "It simply is." The answer was a sigh. Then the aura seemed to decide a different approach because he asked, "When were you born?" Good question. This time Sal had just two answers to his disposal. One if he had to tell a date. After all, he didn't know the date, when he had been reborn in the past. Seemed like his vague plan he made in France with his uncle was the answer he would go with this time around. Well, at least he wouldn't have to make up how he ended up in Britain without being registered anymore. The answer took care of that just as well. 31st of July 1980, Sal said. 1980? The aura repeated, disbelief coloring his voice. Yes, Sal's mouth said. Are you telling me you traveled in time? The Aura's eyes were huge now. Yes, Sal's mouth said. It was then the Unspeakable cut in with his own question. Unspeakable Croaker speaking. Does this also explain why you are 15 and 11? He asked interestedly. Sal guessed that that question was open enough to interpret it like he wanted. After all, it was the time travel that got him stuck in his 15-year-old body and taught him how to change his age. Thankfully, the truth serum seemed to see it Sal's way, because it didn't make him explain or answer with no. Yes, Sal said. How old were you before you left the future? The Aura asked with a rasping voice. 15, Sal said truthfully. And now you are 11? Again open for interpretation. Sal decided to take the easy way out. Yes, he said while wondering what the Unspeakable and Aura Black would make out of his answers. How did you interpret it if you find an 11-year-old boy who was not only from the future but once 15 as well? Oh, well, it wasn't Sal who had to think up an interpretation of that. Sal wondered if he had spent too much of his life as a Slytherin, considering that he had taken to twist the truth like a pretzel and was enjoying to see the other two men sweat. The Aura sighed. At least I know now why you stated both, he said. Sal said nothing. He definitely wouldn't answer something that wasn't a question. It would just get him into trouble if he tried. At least that was what Sal guessed out of experience. Then Aura Black turned to the Unspeakable. Is there a way to travel that far in time? He asked the Unspeakable. Obviously there is. Unspeakable, Croaker said, snorting, and then looked at Sal. Did you use a time turner, Salvatia? For a moment Sal played with the idea of interpreting the question more openly and answer with yes, since he had used one when he was still in third year in the future, but in the end he decided to stick with the other answer. He definitely didn't want his time travel to look anything but an accident. After all, no, Sal said. Then how did you get here? I was attacked by Dementors. I lost. The next thing I know is golden light and pain. Then I was in the past, Sal said emotionlessly. The truth, just not the whole truth. Just enough for the serum. And you were 11, the Auror said, sighing. Sal decided simply to not object. It wasn't a question, so he didn't have to answer if he didn't want to, and he definitely didn't want to go into detail about his age-changing abilities. Do you have an idea what happened, Croaker? Aura Black asked the other man in the room. The Unspeakable sighed and winked the Aura closer. Sal guessed he shouldn't hear the answer, but he always had a better hearing than most. Yes, I might. It is possible that it was the child's magic. It sounds like a case of strong accidental magic, the Unspeakable whispered. You don't sound happy about that, Aura Black stated. I would have thought you would be. I mean, you Unspeakables are trying to solve mysteries like that since I don't know when, and the child in front of you might even solve some of those mysteries and such. Oh, Sal was sure that he knew more about time travel than the Unspeakables, but that didn't mean he would share. Knowledge like that was dangerous, and Sal wasn't about to give it up to strangers, even if they seemed to be part of the good guys. Thankfully, the Unspeakable definitely didn't think that Sal had any reason to hold back the knowledge he had, and instead took Sal's innocence as face value. Accidental magic is just that, accidental, he explained the Auror. There's no theory behind it, and sometimes it can't be repeated by trained wizards, try as they might. Oh, the Auror said, but the Unspeakable wasn't done yet. The true problem in this case is that strong accidental magic like the boy's is normally done by a child to keep it safe, that the boy didn't apparate to safety but traveled in time, and not just in time but that far in time, means that there was more wrong in the boy's life but the Dementors he faced. You mean? I guess abuse and absolutely no one to turn to, and no place where he had felt safe at. That also means that if he was 15 that he not even considered school safe. The Aura sighed. You guess bullying too, don't you? The Unspeakable nodded. And no teacher to turn to. I cannot believe that they failed a child enough in the future for it to travel in time. But then why did the boy land here, in this time, I mean? The Unspeakable shrugged. I would guess that this was as far away as his magic could get him, he said. Sal wanted to raise an eyebrow at that conclusion. He wasn't too sure if he should be elated with getting away with the explanation of unintentional magic, or insulted by the idea that he had been so desperate to flee from his relatives through time. But then Sal thought thoughtfully, if I remember it correctly, the Dursleys truly sometimes were people you should have fled from through time. At least like that there would have been no problem with returning to them. Maybe Sal should feel sad that his friends had been good enough to keep him in his rightful time and space. Still, while he definitely hadn't been treated well by the Dursleys, and maybe even had been neglected, in the end it definitely hadn't been as grave as the unspeakable made it sound. He had had friends after all, friends and a lot of people who either wanted to kill or manipulate him. Maybe that would be enough to send him to the past. Just that it hadn't after all. Sal knew exactly how he ended up in the past, and accidental magic definitely wasn't the explanation for it. That was the moment he was brought out of his thoughts by the aura. Then why is he 11 now? Aura Black asked, confused. Good question. What would the unspeakable guess this time around? The unspeakable shrugged. I would guess that Hogwarts was a turn for the worse. At 11 he still might have held hope that at school it would be better. The aura nodded, contemplating. So will he stay in our time or will he return to his in the future? He finally asked. The unspeakable shrugged. There is no known way to return to the future, he said. Add to that the boy's magic definitely wouldn't bring him back into a situation he definitely wasn't happy in. I think you can be sure that the boy will stay in this time from now on. So, what do? We wait until the truth serum has run its course, and then I will take the documentation of this interrogation, and instead will draw up all the necessary papers for the boy, the unspeakable said. There's just the problem with his guardianship. Someone will have to take him in and look after him after all. Nope, that definitely wasn't something Sal wanted to happen. Maybe he should have taken Nicholas's idea of contacting the Potters. At least then he would be sure that he wouldn't have to act like a child in the presence of his so-called guardians. Do you know any relations of you, child? Aura Black asked in that moment softly. Sal hesitated just a second before thinking, why not, and saying, the Potters and the Flamels. Those two at least knew or easily could learn about his actual age. Anyone else you know of? This time Sal hesitated a little bit longer before he added after the truth serum urged him. My godfather was a Blacker. You lived with your godfather, the aura said, this time softly and a little hesitatingly. No, with my squib-aunt, Sal answered instantly. And where was your godfather? In prison. Why? For murdering my parents. Well, that sounded more awful than it had been. Stupid truth serum. The aura just sighed and looked at the unspeakable again. Now what? Do we contact the Flamelabs or the Potters and tell them we have a relation from them in our custody? No, somebody else spoke up. He had entered through the door just in time to hear the question of Aura Black. Now you give me the child and I'll take him in. The unspeakable and Aura Black looked a bit unhappily at the silver-eyed man in the door. Garvain Ollivander, unspeakable Croaker said. The same, Ollivander replied evenly. The aura's eyes just narrowed at the Wandmaker. What are you doing here, Garvain? He asked the older man. The Wandmaker smiled. I'm here to take the child home, he said, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. The aura and unspeakable exchanged a glance. Garvain, one of them started to say, but the Wandmaker waved it off. I already know everything about the boy, he said. I could feel it when he treated me. Don't worry, I'll make sure he is sent to Hogwarts, and I will take care of him like my own. While Aura Black still seemed reluctant, the unspeakable just sighed. As you wish, Garvain, he said, obviously knowing that he would lose against Ollivander anyway if he didn't throw the towel now. Croaker, Aura Black objected instantly. The unspeakable looked at the aura in reprimand. The boy needs somebody to take him in, he said. If Garvin is willing and knows where the boy came from, why shouldn't he be the one to take him? It was then that the truth serum finally outran its course, and the hazy feeling vanished. Sal blinked and then rubbed his eyes when he still couldn't see clearly. Ah, welcome back, child, the aura said while turning his frown into a smile, and Sal suddenly understood that if the potion would have worked with him like it worked with others, he shouldn't have remembered anything. But then Sal wasn't a wizard, he was a Firbolg-born, and Firbolgs always were more durable than wizards, especially wizards whose Firbolg inheritance was hundreds of generations away. So the previous whispering was just a precaution. If Sal was an odd one out, Sal didn't delude himself into thinking that he was the only one who might remember what he had been asked when under truth serum. The Auror, meanwhile, went to a table in the far corner that Sal hadn't seen before and returned to the other table with a glass of water. "Here, for the taste," he said. Sal took it and sipped on it. It was just water and not laced with another potion, not that Sal had needed it. He had had thousands of years to accept and ignore the horrible taste a potion produced in the aftermath. He appreciated it nevertheless. "What will happen to me now?" he asked softly. "Will I go to Azkaban?" Of course he knew the answer to the second question, but he couldn't resist adding it. After all, a bit deception never hurt. "No, don't worry, you won't be sent to Azkaban," the Auror said, now smiling more naturally. "We found out about your time travel, and we'll simply register you in this time so that everything is all right." "And what happens to me?" Sal asked. Auror Black frowned. But before he could say something, Ollivander spoke up. "You will go home with me and I'll send you to Hogwarts in September," he said. Sal looked at the man and saw amusement in his eyes. Obviously Ollivander wasn't fooled by Sal's appearance like the other two were. Sal's lips quirked in an acknowledgement of being caught out by the other man. "All right," he agreed. 20 minutes later, he left the ministry with Ollivander and the registration he needed. The moment they entered Ollivander's shop, the man turned and closed the door before scrutinizing Sal. "Speak, Garvain," Ollivander said, his face serious. "What do you have to do with Salvazar Emrys's staff?" Sal smirked. Obviously the Ollivander from the time of the Founders, had left some notes about Sal and his staff. "It belongs to me," Sal answered, still smirking. When Garvain raised an eyebrow in disbelief, Sal just shrugged. "I am Salvazar Emrys," he clarified, later known as Salazar Slytherin, later known as Salvatio Malfoy, son of Mirrodin Emrys himself. Garvain Ollivander's second eyebrow joined his first at those words. Then his gaze intensified. "Lord Morgan is after Hogwarts," he stated. Sal returned his gaze evenly. "That's a well-known fact," he said, "especially considering that Morgan attacked Hogwarts 3 years in a row. It's just luck that he hasn't yet managed to actually take it." The answer was an amused smile from Ollivander. "I wonder what he will say if Slytherin himself will go against him and defend the castle," he said. Sal shrugged. "Nothing much," he replied. "If I do it right, he will never know." Ollivander's smile widened. "Good," he said, "and now tell me what I can do to help you with taking him down." It was then that the alliance between Sal and his godfather Ollivander's family would be renewed. The renewal would go hand in hand with the defeat of another Dark Lord and the appearance of a whole ward set in Diagon Alley that could be activated by the Ollivander family in a time of need. Of course, a century later, Garrick Ollivander would be declared insane when he started to empty his basement and putter up and down the alley where the activation sequences of the wards were hidden. 1899. Sal returned to the presence when the master healer noticed that Eloise had woken up and turned to face her. The moment Sal noticed that they wouldn't be able to continue their previously unnoticed conversation, he gestured discreetly to take down a runic ward he had placed around them that had kept the others from hearing them. "Madam Mintumble, you're awake," the healer said, his eyes as grave as Salvazar's. "I won't survive the night," Eloise rasped out the moment she noticed that the healer now had his attention on her and not on the information his spell had given him about her condition. "I'm afraid you won't," the master healer said, obviously seeing no reason to beat around the bush. "We tried everything, but we can't stop the aging process." Eloise grimaced and nodded slowly before lifting her hand and trying to get the attention of one Fleamont Charles Potter, better known simply as Charles Potter by the most inside the room. Charles, on the other hand, was far too preoccupied with crying and screaming at the healers to notice, so in the end Sal took over and called the other man to his best friend's deathbed. The other man still cried, but stepped up next to Eloise nevertheless, all the while murmuring to himself. "This can't be it," he prayed. "Please, not her, not now, please. He might be my descendant," the wind whispered into Sal's ear. But even he can't change her fate, so stop feeling guilty, Salvazahar. Sal just shook his head at the wind while watching the grieving young man on the other side of the bed. He was so young, and yet he had definitely aged since Sal had last seen him all those years ago. 1896, one right off to Threefwing. When Salvatio Malfoy stepped into the halls of the Wizengamot, people stepped aside to let him pass. A lot of people nodded at him in greeting, and even those who didn't made sure to not be in his way. Sal hated it. Every man, every woman, was looking at him with something akin to respect, but Sol hated to be the center of attention. Salvatio, one of the men, called out and stepped out of the crowd. Henry. Sal returned the greeting of his old friend with a smile. He had met Henry on his way to Hogwarts. Is the seat taken? The back then shy youth had asked while entering the compartment of the train Sal had occupied. It was the first time ever that the way to Hogwarts was bridged by using a train. The magical world had watched the mundane world open the first railway just a year before and had enthusiastically copied the concept the moment they understood the advantages. Years later, King's Cross would be built around the already existing magical station in the midst of London. No, Sal said. Go ahead and sit down. It'd definitely more fun if I'm not forced to sit alone for the ride. The answer was a smile from the other boy, and he brought in his trunk and stowed it away with Sal's pets. Then he held out his hand for Sal to take. Henry Potter, he said, it's a pleasure to meet you. In that moment, Henry reached Sal and pulled him out of his memories. Look who the cat dragged in, the current Lord Potter joked. Salvatio Malfoy has decided to grace us with his holy presence. Sal rolled his eyes at his friend. I'm not holy, he said. The other man's grin just widened. Hard-working, crafty and stubborn then, he conceded. I'm not. Of course you are, Henry Potter laughed. That's what you've always been. Just look at your sorting in Hogwarts if you don't believe me. And Sal couldn't suppress his smirk when he was reminded of his sorting this time around. The sorting hat was rummaging through his mind. Sal found it funny that even the hat was unable to penetrate all the occlumency shields Sal had created over the years. Well, you definitely love to learn, the hat whispered. You have a mind that Ravenclaw would be proud of, but you are deceiving. You use your knowledge to your own benefit, or the benefit of others, if you have to. I am sure thoughts like that would make you a good Slytherin. It's just that you are also brave and would die to protect others. Gryffindor would die to have you in his house. And then the loyalty, so much like Hufflepuff. Sal could nothing but snort. But where to put you? The hat said. You should put me where I belong, Sal suggested. The sorting hat sighed. Yes, it answered, but you are difficult. The founders would have argued over your sorting. I am sure every one of them would have loved you to be in their house. I am sure Slytherin would not have argued with them, Sal answered. I am sure he never would have taken me in. That's what you think, child, the sorting hat answered. I think different. I am sure he would have loved to have you in his house, but I think that maybe Hufflepuff might have won. You are very interested in working for your goals. Then go ahead and sort me, Sal said, amused. But please be reasonable, my dear hat. I will have to live in that house for quite some time, you know. Reasonable, the hat harumphed. I can do reasonable if you wish. Have fun in Huffle. In that moment, Sal decided to open his shield so that the sorting hat would be able to look at his memories of Salazar Slytherin. The reaction came instantly. Slith, the hat shrieked, not even able to finish the word before he fell from Sal's head. The whole great hall fell silent. What by Merlin and Morgana is a Huffleslith hat? Phineas Nigellus Black, headmaster of Hogwarts, asked, confused. Sal raised an eyebrow at the hat. The hat returned the gaze and then snorted. Moron, it said fondly. I always knew that being related to Rick would one day influence you in some way. I normally don't play jokes, Sal pointed out. And yet here I am having screamed a name that doesn't exist thanks to you, the hat replied, equally amused. Hat, the headmaster asked the hat again. Sal raised an eyebrow. The hat sighed. Hufflepuff, it cried, and Sal's new and confused housemates started clapping. Then the hat lowered its voice again. But that's just because you promised to go there next to Peverell, you Slytherin. Sal grinned, bowed down and picked it up again. I knew you would be reasonable, he told the hat. The hat just snorted. You're a deceiving, cunning bastard, Slytherin, it hissed, but then it started to smile again. Welcome home, my child, my father, my guardian. Sal just grinned at the hat. My parents were married, you know, he answered, but thanks anyway, and with that he turned to the Hufflepuff table, aware that everyone was staring at him. Later, nearly everybody was convinced that someone had tried to hex the hat and had failed when Sal had been sorted. I still want to know what you did to confuse the hat, Henry Potter mused. And I repeat, I didn't do anything, Sal replied amused. It was its own fault that it screamed a nonsense word for me. Henry rolled his eyes at Sal fondly before turning around and looking back the way he came. Ah, he said the moment he spotted his missing companion. Charles, son, come here and meet one of my best friends. What will you do when you've finished your schooling? 12-year-old Henry Potter asked his Hufflepuff friend. Sal shrugged. I don't know yet, he said. Maybe I'll become a potions master. He already was one, had been registered since he married Andromeda, SEL, Salvazahar Emrys Lefay was his well-known signature. Or maybe a healer, he mused. He had had his oath for millennia. Or a professor here at Hogwarts, he added. He had been that more than once. What will you do? Henry shrugged. I don't know, he said. Maybe I should choose my electives blindly? If you don't know, it would be best to take arithmancy and ancient runes. Those two are needed or useful in a lot of professions, Sal suggested. Henry smiled at him. You just don't want to go alone to those classes, he said amused. Sal returned the other boy's smile with a smile he normally had always reserved for his children. That as well, he admitted, and Henry beamed. Salvatio, Henry said when the boy, a splitting image of his father, had reached them. This is my son Fleamont. Fleamont, this is my best friend and your godfather Salvatio. It's Charles, the boy mumbled unhappily. Fleamont is an absolutely horrible name, father. I'm going by Charles now. Henry frowned at his son. It was the wish of your grandmother, so that her family name doesn't die out, he said, and I think Fleamont is quite a nice name. Fleamont. Charles's face turned sour. Well, he said unhappily, you aren't the one who has been called Flea for all his life because of that ridiculous name. His father sighed and shook his head before turning with an eye roll to Sal. Children, he exclaimed amused. So theatrical. But oh well, Salvatio, this is my son Charles. Sal raised an eyebrow at the other man. May I remind you that I'm the ancient runes professor at Hogwarts, he said amused. Your son has been in my class for 3 years already. The boy blushed when he finally recognized Sal and looked away, clearly a bit uncomfortable after he had corrected his father in front of his teacher. Well, yes, Henry said, but since you haven't been at my home since Mother died, I know that you haven't met him yet outside the school since he was 2. It's truly sad that the most of the time we meet, Flea Charles is elsewhere. It is, Sal said and smiled at the youth. One of that generation Sal had fought for when he had fought Morgan so that they weren't forced to grow up with a Dark Lord lurking in the background. When Sal had been in his last year of Hogwarts, Lord Morgan had given up on the idea of secret infiltration of Hogwarts and had led a head-on assault on Hogwarts. The teachers and students had been panicking. The moment Sal heard about the army in front of Hogwarts gates, he had finally shed his normal student persona and had stepped out of Hogwarts, a basilisk to his left, a phoenix to his right, and in his hands a weapon that had belonged to him long before it had started to be adorned with Godric Gryffindor's name. He had stepped out of the entrance to the castle, and his eyes, instead of showing fear, had shown determination. Atra, he said. Close down the wards, let's show them what it means to fight a losing battle. That was the day Hogwarts would be known all over Europe as the safest place in Britain, maybe even a safer place than Gringotts. This was the day the reputation of Hogwarts would start. This was also the day Salvatio Malfoy would change from a gifted student to someone admired and fawned over. He would gain a reputation that would only be eclipsed by Albus Dumbledore after said man had defeated Grindelwald, and even then the older generation held on to their belief that Salvatio Malfoy would have been the greater man if they had lived at the same time. Of course, the younger generations objected, and over time, Salvatio Malfoy would be forgotten while Albus Dumbledore's star continued to shine. After the battle, it would also be the last time Salo would see his grandmother. "My mind is slipping," she told him softly. "In a few months, I will be nothing but a mindless beast. I won't remember my life and anyone I held dear." "Grandmother," Sal whispered, and fear laced his voice when he understood what his grandmother was telling him. She just smiled. "One day, the phoenix will be lost to the flames," she told him. "One day, the elf will be lost to his dreams, and the elder dragon, the Dementor, and the basilisk will succumb to the beast inside them. This is how it should be. My time has come. My mind is slipping away from me, and I can't and won't stop it. Another month or two, and I won't recognize you anymore." "Grandmother," Sal said again, now with tears in his eyes. She just smiled at him warmly. "This is the lot of the immortal, my egg," she said. "One day we will lose our mind and become the mindless beasts that reside within us since birth. One day, my egg, you will have to confront that beast as well, and one day you will lose yourself to it." With that, she brushed aside his tears. "Don't grieve for me, my egg," she told him, "and don't try to save me. If you have to, then kill me, but don't try to save what has long since lost its memories to time." "But—" "No, my egg," she said softly. "It's my time to go. I had a long and wonderful life. Just promise me you won't go near my mindless body without being careful, my egg. You and I know that a mindless basilisk will do anything to kill off its own offspring, and I can't bear the thought of losing you to my fangs." "I skate-shrew." "I promise," Sal whispered while his mind supplied him with the image of a blinded basilisk in a dark and dreary chamber set on killing a 12-year-old boy who would once be the basilisk's grandson. "I promise, grandmother, I won't come near you if there isn't another life in danger." His grandmother just smiled at him and then turned to Hogwarts, intending to hide away in its depth. "I love you, my grandson," she said. "Never forget that, will you?" "Never," Sal promised. This would be the last time he would ever see his grandmother alive. Just a few months later, the only thing remaining of her would be the mindless beast hibernating in the depths of Hogwarts, a beast that would be used to kill an innocent Ravenclaw girl just barely a century later. "Well then," Henry said while smiling at his son, "maybe we could meet again sometime this summer, this time with my son in attendance. I'm sure it will do him something good to get to know my best friend outside the classroom as well." Sal smiled at his friend. "I'd love that," he said. Sal would never regret saving Hogwarts back when he had attended 7th year. Sal would never regret working with Garvain Ollivander to keep Diagon Alley safe. And Sal would never regret to meet up with Henry Potter that summer, even if he'd known that he'd leave for a new life as an apprentice in St. Mungo, barely 2 years later. But that was life, and Sal had long since learned to live it as he pleased. And it wasn't as if being young again and an apprentice did stop him from meeting his friends, after all. 1899, daar het het schat pulfro. 1899, vervoerd pulfro, audio, undertile, de gupa adena poenel wiscaretum nubios pulthambella. Flamont Charles looked at Sal in confusion when Sal winked him towards the bed, but stepped near his best friend anyway. "Chora loves." Eloise rasped, and again hot tears adorned her best friend's eyes. Sorry," and Sol could feel his heart break a bit at the look on Charles's face. It wasn't that Sol didn't understand that he couldn't help her, it was more that he was forced to see his godson suffer because of a mistake the woman on the bed made centuries ago. "You don't have to be sorry," Charles said, crying. "We made a mistake, our calculations were wrong somehow, and we—" Eloise shook her head. "I made it," she whispered. "I was warned, I didn't listen. Sorry." And with that she closed her eyes. Her breathing stopped. Charles's eyes widened. "Eloise?" he asked, fear lacing his voice. "Eloise?" When she didn't react, he stepped nearer, clearly intending to shake her, but the healers were faster. "She stopped breathing," the master healer cried. "Ready your wands to shock her." One of the nurses forced Charles out of the way. For a moment, Sal watched the other healers trying to reanimate Eloise. Then he stepped around the bed and up to Charles. Unlike the other healers, Sal knew that Eloise wouldn't wake up again. I knew you would understand that sometimes you can't do anything but step away and let me claim them, the wind whispered in his ears. You've done well, my balance. Now look after my descendant. He's the one you can still help today. With that, the wind left him alone with Fleamont Charles Potter. Time of death, the master healer declared from the bed. Sal closed his eyes for a second, then he reached out to Charles. He was just in time to catch the younger man before his legs gave out, and he landed on the floor. I'm sorry, child, Sal whispered in his godson's hair. I'm so sorry, child. Charles started to sob into his shoulder. I'm sorry. Regretfully, some things couldn't be changed, and Eloise's death was one of them.